Hey, we are live.
We are live with Dr. Paul Kengor. Pleasure.
Good, yeah, great to be with you, Matt. Thanks. Yeah, terrific.
For those...
great studio.
Thank you. You like it?
Yeah, I do.
We have
really
800 children all around us.
Yeah, that's right. Makes
it
or
fun.
At least, yeah, about 800. That's about right.
For those who aren't familiar with you, who are you? What do you do?
Well, oh man. So I don't know how much of the life story do you want, but I was born December 1966 in Pittsburgh. So I was born at McGee Hospital in Pittsburgh, which is on the campus of the University of Pittsburgh, which is ironic because I ended up going to school there as an undergrad. And I went to Butler High School, Butler, Pennsylvania. And that was, so that's the alma mater of people as diverse as Rick Santorum, Terry Hanratty, the Notre Dame quarterback, Steelers quarterback, who was there for the Immaculate Reception of Franco Harris.
I'm not even going to pretend I understand that reference.
You don't know the Immaculate Reception.
The American football, is it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. By the way, as a giant American football fan, I got to admit, to call it football is really stupid. What does that have to do with football? I mean, what do you kick during an American football, but football, because you call it like tackle.
I wonder what the history of that is.
I don't know.
It came to be called that.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous. and I bleed black and gold as a Steelers fan, but you don't know what the Immaculate Reception is, no?
I barely know what the Steelers are.
So all right, so we have 2 hours, right? All right,
Forget the communism talk. Let's just do this.
But the 50th anniversary, December 23rd, 1972, of this epic game between the Steelers and the Oakland Raiders. They had like almost 30 Hall of Famers between the two teams. I mean, it's just an amazing thing. And there's like 30 seconds left on the clock, maybe less than that. 4th and 10, I think Terry Bradshaw, the Steelers quarterback, just throws a desperate pass down the field, aiming for a guy named Frenchie Fuqua, and it hits Fuqua in the back and bounces in the air, and Franco Harris reaches down and picks it up before it falls on the ground, runs it in for a touchdown. Steelers win, and they gave it the name the Immaculate Reception.
We're going to have to watch this on YouTube after the interview.
And by the way, as I'm saying this and people are listening, Franco Harris just died. He was 72 years old.
When was
yesterday?
It's funny you say that because this morning I turned the radio on accidentally and I heard Immaculate Reception.
Yeah. Well, it's an absolutely stunning thing because he was, as far as we know, he was in great shape, and so the Steelers are playing the Raiders on Christmas Eve, December 24th, and the NFL Network set up all of this. The entire country was going to watch this celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Immaculate Reception. It's known as the most famous play in the history of NFL football. And Franco Harris was going to be there, and they were going to retire his jersey. They've only retired 1 or 2 jerseys, the Steelers, despite all these great players. And he died. He died yesterday. A complete shock. I wrote a piece on it for Crisis Magazine, and I think they're going to be posting it on the 23rd. But anyway, so that's part of Steelers football lore.
And where do you teach now? And what do you teach?
So I teach at Grove City College in Grove City, Pennsylvania, which is alma mater of Scott Hahn. And Scott was, when Scott was at Grove City, he was chasing around Catholics with torches, running them off campus. And Scott ended up, of course, being probably the most famous convert.
I would say in the English-speaking world, he's probably converted almost as many people as John Paul II.
No, really true. And in fact, his book, Rome Sweet Home, which if you go back and read through it, you'll see, oh yeah, wow, Grove City College. It's all through there. So he talks all about Grove City. That's where he met Kimberly as well, his wife.
When did you first meet Scott?
So I met him in the early 2000s. I got to Grove City College in 1997. It was really my first full-time teaching job out of college. And Scott... it's kind of interesting. So my colleague, Michael Coulter, who's also a convert and teaches at Grove City College, pulled me aside one day and said, hey, I got this call from Scott Hahn, who was stuck in an airport and he found your book, God and Ronald Reagan. And he read in the back read my bio that I taught at Grove City College. And Scott, in kind of typical Hahn speak, said, "You can see a lot about Kengor in the bio in the words of this book, right?" What does that mean? But I think he was referring to a lot of the Catholic references, the relationship between Reagan and John Paul II, Reagan and Mother Teresa. Reagan's family had all these Catholic influences. His father was Catholic. His only sibling, his brother, was a daily communicant.
So are you a convert?
I'm a convert, yeah. Well, I mean, technically, I'm a revert, But I was raised in the church in the Dark Ages.
When was that? The
60s?
1970s?
The 70s.
Worse, yeah.
Robbie George asked me one time. He said, "Paul, tell me your story. You're a convert? No, you're a revert." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I was raised in the church in the 70s." And he said, "Oh, the Dark Ages. You don't need to say anything else. You don't need to say anything else." But yeah, so I was. I fell away from the church in the 80s when I went to college, University of Pittsburgh. I was a pre-med major at the University of Pittsburgh. So I went there. I worked for the organ transplant team from 1987 to 91. Where it was pioneered, organ transplantation was pioneered by my boss, Dr. Thomas Starzl. There's a great documentary on him, which just came out about 3 years ago, called, why can't I think of the name of it right now? Neil could probably find it. The documentary on Dr. Thomas Starzl, and it is A Burden of Genius. That's what it's called. So we did 90% of the world's organ transplants at the University of Pittsburgh in the late 90s. And I was agnostic, almost atheist at that point, and I was planning on going to medical school. It was the late 80s, and I got very, very interested in the end of the Cold War. I started writing for the student newspaper, which was called the Pitt News. That's where I met my wife. She was the copy editor. I was the editorial page editor. Published 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, print edition. I was the campus conservative that all the liberals attacked and called names. Already calling me every name in the book before I even wrote like my second column. I mean, at that point, I had already been called a fascist, a Nazi, and just go on down the line for writing an article on Reagan arming the Contras in Nicaragua or something. But I got interested in the end of the Cold War. Ronald Reagan, Pope John Paul II, Margaret Thatcher, Lech Walesa, Václav Havel, Solidarity Movement, Mikhail Gorbachev. And I got pulled in my senior year between majoring in biochem biophysics, which was my major, and taking a bunch of courses on political science. And I thought, boy, what do I really want to do with my life? Which direction do I want to go in? What do I want to do? And interestingly, I used to walk home to my apartment on North Craig Street in Oakland, right next to Chief's Bar. You know where Chief's is? Mm-hmm. Okay. I thought you would.
No, I don't. Yeah.
You haven't been here long enough yet.
That's right.
But right next to Chief's Bar, and I would stop at St. Paul's Cathedral in Oakland, and go inside and just sort of beg God. I'd say, if you're really there, if you really exist, tell me, what am I supposed to do with my life? What do you want me to do with my life?
You went into a bar to ask this question.
Tell me, please, tell me.
Is that what you're saying? You went into a pub to ask this question?
Well, no, I went into St. Paul's Cathedral.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, I missed that.
Yeah,
you were in a pub
part.
And then you went to the church?
No. So the pub was the pub was right next to my apartment.
Okay.
But I would stop at St. Paul's Cathedral on the way home from class or from work when I worked at the organ transplant team, because I worked there almost full time while I was in school. And I would just beg God, what am I supposed to do with my life? What if you exist? What am I supposed to do? So it was a really agonizing decision, but I ended up graduating with a degree in political science, intending to finish my degree in biochem biophysics. Transplant team hired me full-time out of school. I did that for about a year. And then I went to college, graduate school at American University in Washington, the School of International Service, focusing on foreign policy, national security, and really focusing on the issue of the end of the Cold War, communism, Russia, China, Eastern Europe. And it was there for a few years, worked for a number of think tanks and other organizations. My wife and I, we got married when we were in DC. And then we both came back to the University of Pittsburgh to apply for graduate school, because DC, it's a great place to work, but if you're in that field, but it's not a place to raise kids. It's kind of a rat race. Mm-hmm. So we both decided we're going to apply back to our alma mater. She applied to the master's program in exercise physiology. I applied to the PhD program, and we both got in. So we both came back and got our graduate degrees there. And then I got hired at Grove City College in 1997. So my conversion, my wife took a gamble. She married me when I was really not a Christian. And she didn't understand that, how I couldn't believe in God. I remember tearful conversations with her, right, where she just said, I just don't see how you can't believe. And I would give agnostic, atheistic arguments. But I eventually, through frankly, evangelical Christians, found my way to the faith.
Who was one of the more prominent ones that you...
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I read a whole bunch of them. And I mean, all the popular ones of the day. I listened to kind of evangelical talk radio. R.C. Sproul, who was an influence on Scott Hahn. D. James Kennedy of Coral Ridge Ministries. Of course, C.S. Lewis, right? And I read all of them, and I kind of reasoned my way into the Christian faith. And then slowly, so I joined the Presbyterian Church USA, PCUSA. That's considered the mainline denomination of Presbyterians. By the way, they call the Presbyterians the split peas because they're always splitting. And PCUSA recently split again. In fact, there in Grove City, my church, Tower Church, was PCUSA. Scott Hahn will know all of this. And then across the street was East Main Church. That was PCUSA, Presbyterian Church USA. They're both now outside of PCUSA. They're both in the new denominations.
Was your wife Presbyterian? Is that why you were?
She was. She was Presbyterian. And by the way, those two, PCUSA splintered up over kind of theological liberalism. You know, issues like marriage, ordination, kind of all the usual issues. So I was there in a Presbyterian church for a while, from probably 1995, 97 until 2005 when I came into the church, and John Paul II was a major influence on that. Yeah. So I could talk a lot more about why I became Catholic, if you want.
Well, very good. Well, I want to get to the topic at hand, communism. So this past week I read the Communist Manifesto.
Oh, congratulations. That's wonderful, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's definitely more of a rah-rah poetic book than it is a philosophically precise book, isn't it?
It's polemical. I mean, really, I've heard people say, how would you best describe Marx? Because Marx is clearly not an economist. I mean, that's for sure.
Okay.
In fact,
what did he study? Because he's said to be an economist.
Well, and it's interesting too. You'll see this, just getting ahead of that a little bit. At the universities today, when you hear of Marxist professors like Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, they had a 200th anniversary celebration of the birth of Marx in 2018. That was put on by the English department, right? It's always like the critical theory folks. It's not the economists, it's not the political scientists, it's not the historians, all right? I mean, though at colleges, you will at a lot of colleges have that econ professor with a bust of Marx in the office, but it's usually people in education, English, departments like that. But if you read the Communist Manifesto, he he knows squat about economics. I mean, it is more, frankly, it's kind of a diatribe, but he's very polemical. It's more philosophical. Marx fancied himself a poet. Marx wanted to be nothing less than wanted to be the Goethe of his age, the Faust of his age. And that's where he kind of dabbled with some of his satanic poetry. That's quite chilling.
When did communism become a word? When was that was it Engels and Marx?
It's a great question. It's a great question. It was 1840s. Richard Pipes, who was the longtime Harvard professor emeritus of Russian history, he died in, I think, 2018. And I know him very well, but he's so good on this subject. In fact, his short book, Communism, A History, is something I strongly recommend. Okay. People will say to me often, is there just like a 100 or 200 page book? Yeah. and he describes their communism as an ideal, a program, and a regime, which is a really good way to put it. But he said that the word communism was coined in Paris at some point in the 1840s, which seems to be true. Probably Marx and Engels met in Paris probably around 1844. So at that point, communism exists, and they formed something called the Communist League, which is made up of 40 to 50, basically, progressives, white European males, right? And the guys you're not supposed to like. But Marx's wife was the only female in the group. But it was the Communist League, wasn't a party yet. and they decided we need a sort of programmatic statement of what the communists believe. So they tasked to Marx and Engels.
They were paid by that league, correct?
Yeah, I don't know if they were paid or not.
That's what I read.
But they probably were paid.
And then they were paid to revise it, I think.
Well, Marx was obsessed with money, which is really the irony of this. I mean,
I want to just back up a sec before we get into this, because it's said that those who are unaware of history are doomed to repeat it. And I think sometimes we can be so familiar with the position, the insanity of it can be so apparent to us that maybe we're kind of leaving people behind a little. There's bound to be people who are watching right now going, I don't even know what this thing is, where it came from, why anyone would find it appealing.
Right.
So maybe before we get a little bit more complicated, can you just give us a overview?
Let me finish this first. So they went to Marx and Engels and said, we need a kind of a what we believe statement. So they came up with, now first, they called it, there's a letter from Engels to Marx where Engels says to Marx, give a little more thought to our communist confession of faith.
Wow.
So they called it.
Can you pass me that?
Yeah,
Keep going, but...
The Communist Confession of Faith. He said, I think we should drop the catechetical form and just call it the Manifesto.
Okay.
The Communist Manifesto. So they end up with this book that becomes the Communist Manifesto, which is published in 1848. Now, this is a Catholic show. In 1846, Pope Pius IX issued the encyclical Qui Pluribus, condemning communism. That's 2 years before the manifesto was even published. So communism existed before the manifesto was published in 1848. So that in itself shows that the idea had already been around. In fact, the opening words of the manifesto are that a specter is haunting Europe.
Yeah.
The specter of communism. It says all the old powers of Europe, Pope and Tsar, Metternich, German radicals, others, are allied together into a holy alliance exorcise this specter.
Let's hope.
Yeah, so they describe it in this kind of specter, demonic, exorcism language. So literal first words of the manifesto.
I just want to read this one line to get to our point about it being a diatribe more than something philosophically precise. I mean, it's quite poetic. It talks about the bourgeoisie. They have drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, and the icy water of egotistical calculation.
Yeah.
Makes you feel really smart when you say those big words.
Well, he had a poison pen. He was an angry man, and he could really he could write. I mean, he's a polemicist. He's an arguer, right? That's what he was good at doing. Sure. If you wanted a kind of vitriolic hatchet man to make your case, that was Marx.
All right. So what is communism? And say it in a way that a communist listening would go, yeah, I agree.
Okay, here's the easiest way to say it that people can't argue with, all right? Let's say Marx and Engels gave us a definition. They gave us 4 words. They say in this book, the entire communist theory program may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. Now, once you actually read the book, and you hear all the time, I get this from young people at college campuses around the country that, communism's a pretty good idea if you just read it, if you just read the book. And have you read it?
Yeah.
Well, I've kind of looked around a little bit, but I haven't. But if you read it, they're talking not just about abolition of private property. They say that that's what it is. There's the word abolition of all religion, all morality, all eternal truths. Quote, abolition of the family, ! Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. Mm-hmm. That's verbatim from the book. They talk about abolishing money, capital, states, entire societies.
So then tell me, why is this attractive to someone? Even if they haven't read it, that's okay. Whatever their bad idea of communism, why is that appealing to people?
Today, I think it's utterly inexplicable how it could be attractive. Now, in the 1840s, I think maybe the only thing you could say in defense of it is that Marx and Engels got right just how bad some of the effects were of the Industrial Revolution.
Okay.
Right? Some of the abuses of workers in the Industrial Revolution. But so did all kinds of people.
No, I want you to stay on. I need you to Steelman the case.
I have a little bit of pushback too, because not that I like communism. But
yeah, you do.
No, I don't.
Bull crap.
No. The abolition of that private property, that's just anarchism, right? Are these people anarchists, or is there actual? Because when I hear about communism, it's usually more like, what is it creating as a, if we all pool our funds and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people think it's just about redistribution of the wealth. And in fact, if you look at some modern polls of younger people where they ask them, hey, what do you think of communism, right? Yeah. And they'll say, well, I kind of like it, right? 40%. And they'll say, well, define what you think communism is. And they'll say, some polls literally say exactly this, right? From younger people. Oh, it's about people being kind to one another.
Right.
It's about sharing. It's about free stuff.
Yep.
But on the abolition point, these are bullet points on page 383 of my book, The Devil and Karl Marx. Marx in the manifesto said that communism represents, quote, the most radical rupture in traditional relations.
Yes,
now, right there, think about that. What is communism? Well, says Marx, it represents the most radical rupture in traditional relations. So they knew how radical it was. Also said,
Because until this time, he's essentially saying we're just rearranging furniture on the Titanic because capitalism poisons everything.
Well, he says more than that. In the manifesto, he and Engels write that communism, quote, seeks to abolish the present state of things.
Right.
I mean, seeks to abolish the present state of things.
Forcibly is the word he uses,
all? Right? Yeah. Now here's the kicker. Here's the money line, if you're pardon the expression. The close of the manifesto, everybody remembers the phrase, workers of the world unite, we have a world to win. But the final paragraph, where it says those things, also says this. The communists openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. All right. So people that think that this is just about sharing the wealth and being kind enough, they're saying in their book, they're calling for the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. These guys aren't tinkerers. They're not just talking about cutting taxes or increasing tax rates or a few regulations or national health care, right? Forcible overthrow of all existing, and these guys do this all the time. But abolish. All.
But wouldn't they say, whereas the capitalist says people are self-interested by nature and therefore that's why capitalism is the way things ought to be, wouldn't they say, no, it's the other way around. Capitalism has made us self-interested and made us selfish and cruel, so we have to overthrow everything in order that something new can result from it.
In order to start entirely anew. And really... Marx, that's where Marx was. In fact, when Marx was asked if he had a favorite line, and people who knew Marx was asked if he had a favorite line. I mean, you or I might cite a scripture verse or a quote from a saint, or I'll say, yeah, John Paul II, be not afraid. Marx said, yes, Goethe's Faust, the Mephistopheles character. Now, the Mephistopheles character is the demon, devil character in Faust. And the line was, everything that exists deserves to perish. Everything that exists deserves to perish. One of the biographers of Marx, Paine, says, picture Marx, and you can see this in his poetry, kind of standing there in the smoldering ruins, the embers, right? Everything on fire, everything raised, R-A-Z-E-D, everything level, and then saying, now we can begin, right? Everything that exists deserves to perish. It's really forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions.
Yeah.
That's a philosopher.
And he also, I mean, the main idea for those who haven't read it is this idea that there's this antagonism between two major classes, the oppressor and the oppressed. This is written to the oppressed.
Right.
He seems to be assuming that the oppressors are wholly evil and the oppressed are good, just, kind, empathetic.
That's right.
And that even though they're going to have to take the place of the bourgeoisie, they won't keep it for long. And that they'll eliminate all the systems that have caused this antagonism, which just seems so insane that would ever happen. But
yeah, and he had, and the irony of that is that Marx had a very negative view of people. In fact, he referred to what he called the lumpen proletariat. And Marx's charming definition was this: alongside ruined and adventurous offshoots of the bourgeoisie were vagabonds, discharged soldiers, discharged jailbirds, escaped galley slaves, swindlers, mountebanks, lazzaroni, pickpockets, tricksters, gamblers, pimps, brothel keepers, porters, literati, organ grinders, rag pickers, knife grinders, tinkers, beggars. And I'm not even talking here about his views of blacks.
This is where the bourgeoisie came from, he's saying.
That's what he called the lumpen proletariat.
What does that mean, lumpen?
Well, it kind of translates into kind of rag vagabond. Well, he uses all kinds of he applies it in a really broad way. But you see there his kind of very demeaning view of the common man. And this is a criticism of Marx that you'll hear even from some people who aren't as anti-Marx as I am. He never visited the factory floor. I mean, Marx wrote all this stuff from, like a library in Britain, or from his apartment as he rested on his carbuncles. He has a famous phrase to Engels that at least maybe the bourgeoisie will remember my carbuncles. He had these violent outbursts of rage because he was infected by these boils on his backside, on his penis. And the doctors came in all to try to figure out, what's he suffering from? No one else in the family seems to be picking this up. But main reason was probably that Marx never bathed. He refused to take a bath.
Why?
He was a really dirty guy, and he his wife. This really depressed his wife and his mother. His parents cut him off.
My wife would be pretty depressed if I never bathed.
Right. Parents cut him off, and so at that point, he got all of his money from Engels and Engels' family's inheritance. The irony here, too, we'll talk about this.
He wants to abolish inheritance.
He wants to abolish all right of inheritance. Marx completely lives from inheritance.
So how in this case isn't Engels the bourgeoisie and he the proletariat?
Right.
How do you, quick question? How do you even make that distinction? Is it those who are paying a wage for somebody else's time and work and creativity? Are those the bourgeoisie, like the owners of factories?
Yes.
How did he make the distinction?
Well, that's a good point, because this binary kind of, you're in the proletariat or the bourgeoisie, is just an incredible simplification. It's kind of like modern critical race theorists, right? Where you're
the
either
good guys
black
or the
or
bad
white.
guys. Yeah.
Yeah,
Which one?
Right, and whichever you are defines you and puts you in a box, as if you think a certain way and act a certain way. So he's really just...
You can totally see this in BLM. I mean, that last line about the overthrowing of the current structure and to bring about some dreamed of utopian equality. I mean, if you were just to read that line and say, where does this apply in the United States over the last 10 years? Well, obviously BLM. We can get to that.
Yeah, and that's the Marxist framework. Now, the Marxist framework was Martin Malia, who was a professor at University of California, Berkeley, and actually wrote the best preface to the Communist Manifesto. This is in the Penguin Classics version. And Malia, he was probably more like a moderate Democrat, sort of. I don't know that he was very conservative, but he really understood Marx very well. He said, for Marx, the proletariat is both the victim class and the redeemer class. All right. Yeah. By the stripes of the proletariat shall we be healed.
That's what I got from reading it. Yeah.
And there's kind of like a via del croce, way of the cross, right? That the proletariat was going through. But, and Lenin said this, all the others have said it, all the Marxists through the 1960s said it, the proletariat's consciousness had to be raised. They had to be taught that they were the suffering class. They had to be informed of this. Mark Rudd, Mark Rudd, one of the founders of the Weather Underground, said it used to frustrate us. We would go into the working class areas of Chicago and New York and Pittsburgh, to the Italian kids, the Polish kids, us kids from Columbia, right? Bill Ayers, Mark Rudd, Bernardine Dohrn, and we were trying to tell them how repressed they were. But they're all like Italian and Polish Catholics, and they're saying, "Get out of here, you commies!" And they'd beat us up, right? The greasers didn't want anything to do with us. So the educated elite are standing there saying, "Do you not understand how oppressed you are?" Right? And of course they want nothing to do with communism. But the proletariat needs to understand that it's the victim class which will serve as the redeemer class. So they will usher in the revolution. Now, the Marxist framework, ever hereafter for all modern day Marxists, including Marxists in culture, is to always look for that new victim class. So the victim class, according to gender Marxists, might be women. the victim class for critical race theorists, Marxist-based CRT advocates, would be blacks, right? And so blacks have to be informed that they are repressed. Even if you're talking to someone like Oprah Winfrey, right, or somebody, or an
NBA player,
an NBA player is like, wait, I don't feel repressed at all. I vote Republican. I want lower tax cuts. And they're like, no, you are repressed because of the color of your skin. And that guy over there who might be white and might be homeless, he's your repressor, right? Whether you realize it or not, which is, again, the absurdity and the incredible simplification that these guys engage in, which is something that Catholicism and Christianity doesn't do. Right? I mean, we are all individuals made in the imago Dei, the image of God. We were not born into groups. This hammers everyone into groups. Wyatt T. Walker, who was a close friend of Martin Luther King Jr., said critical race theory came after King, who was shot in April 1968, but he would have absolutely rejected any sort of theory that put people into categories or groups and defined them that way. Because King said, you are judged by the content of your character, not the color of your skin. So you don't define people that way. But that's what these guys did. And they were willing to launch revolutions and abolish and clean out entire societies in order to get there.
Wow. So, I mean, if it weren't for Marx and Engels, other people would have been writing on this, I suppose. But well, okay, to some extent, yeah. I mean, there's a category, my friend Dan Flynn, one of my fellow columnists at the American Spectator, if I can give a plug for the American Spectator, I'm the editor of American Spectator. Please do. We'll put a link in the description
Spectator.org. But Dan Flynn did a book called Intellectual Morons. And his argument was that how ideology can make you stupid, how it can force people who are otherwise very intelligent to go for these really bad ideas because ideology kind of pushes them in there. But he talks about the Yankee utopians. In America from the 1820s to 1840s were all sorts of socialists who preceded Marx, who were engaging in this. There was a guy, Welsh, British, Scottish, Robert Owen was his name. And he founded what people have called a communist colony in New Harmony, Indiana in 1826. And this is a crazy thing. Neil, you could look it up and post it maybe. And this is the kind of thing we ought to be learning in our schools. Robert Owen in New Harmony, Indiana on July 4th, 1826. So it's the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. I got to ask you, I don't mean to embarrass you as a non-American. Do you know who died in America on July 4th, 1826?
No.
Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, which is amazing because Jefferson wrote the Declaration and Adams chose him to write the Declaration. Adams was 90 years old. Jefferson was 83. This was going to be America's Jubilee. The whole country is watching, right? Are they going to make it to July 4th? They made it, and the whole country was celebrating. But as that's going on, Robert Owen, this British socialist, stands there at his ideological colony, which is a great phrase of Pope Francis, and in New Harmony, Indiana, and he declares what he calls his Declaration of Mental Independence, where he declares war on what he calls the three-headed hydra, okay, of property, religion, and marriage. So right there, he's going after exactly what Marx and all the communists are going to go after. So would there have been others who would have come along and yeah, probably, I guess.
But the conditions were such that what Marx and Engels did lit a spark. And
it did. And I would say this to Marxists today who say, well, there's something we could learn from this book, right? I mean, he got right the factory conditions in the 1840s. Well, okay, but I got news for you, dude. Look out your window, all right? This is 2022, all right? And you're not looking out your window at 1848, Britain, France, and Germany. All right? This was written for an era that does not exist and is completely gone, which is why today, Marxists that you see today aren't talking about classical Marxism. They're not talking about abolishing private property. Bernie Sanders doesn't talk about that, right? They're borrowing other elements of it to call for maybe nationalization of healthcare, maybe something to do with unions. But most of today's Marxists are applying it at a cultural, gender, and even racial area. If you go to People's World, which is the successor publication to the Daily Worker, they say we are looking for culture workers. Not factory workers, not coal miners from West Virginia, not steel workers from Steubenville and Pittsburgh, right? They're looking for culture workers. They're looking to fight for LGBTQ. They're looking to fight to redefine marriage. So today's Marxists, really, very few of them have anything to do with what these guys were thinking about in the 1840s. Marx couldn't have conceived of same-sex marriage or transgenderism. But today's Marxists, that's where they are.
Yeah, it would seem to me that as someone, say, on a university campus who gets a whiff of socialism would say, look, there's incredible inequality in the world. There are very rich people. There are very poor people. This seems unfair. Socialism is about making it fair. And they might even say, look, even when you read the book of Acts, isn't it funny how it's always the atheists who quote the Bible before the Christian whenever they're trying to make an unchristian doctrine? All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need.
Right.
And they would say, gee, that sounds a lot like socialism. How could this be a problem? Let's just implement this on a nationwide level and called a Christian nation. What's the problem with that?
3 problems with that. One, it's Christian with Marx, which Marx rejected.
I love that you're like, 3 problems, like you haven't been asked this before.
Right. It believes in God, which Marx rejected. He was an atheist. It talks about selling your possessions. How can you sell your possessions if you don't have private property to begin with?
Very good. Yeah.
These people are voluntarily on their own for the purposes of the church, the good of Christianity, very voluntarily giving of themselves and being willing to share their property. Communism is a state-run regime by fiat and the power of the state by gun and gulag, forcibly taking money and possessions from everybody, regardless of whether or not they want to do it, and in the name of materialistic atheism, of all things. So it's got nothing to do with that. So you get all the time these kind of, soft-headed, silly religious left Christians will say, wow, the Communist Manifesto talks about sharing, and so does the Bible. It's just like the Bible, No, I mean, just because there's 1 or 2 elements of commonality in something doesn't mean, no, they rejected the Bible. Marx said Christianity preaches cowardice. It preaches sacrifice. It preaches humiliation. He said of Judaism, the Israelite faith is repulsive to me. Communism begins where atheism begins.
Where was that quote from?
Which one?
Communism begins where atheism
begins where atheism begins. It's a quote that's originally written in French. In fact, Fulton Sheen uses that in Communism and the Conscience of the West, Fulton Sheen's 1948 book.
Who said that like Christianity or religion is like necrophilia? Was that Lenin?
That was Lenin, yeah. And so,
what was the context of that? What did he mean by that?
Yeah, Lenin said, there is nothing more abominable than religion. All worship of a divinity is a necrophilia. He said, religion is a kind of medieval mildew, a spiritual booze. It is the opiate of the masses.
It was Lenin who said it's the opiate.
Lenin said that, but Lenin quoting Marx. Lenin said, like Marx said, it's the opiate of the masses. And if you look at Marx's actual opiate of the masses essay, he says in there, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. So sometimes you'll hear people on our side say, well, I can see what Marx meant. I mean, religion and opium of the people, it's kind of like a drug, like a crutch. As Christians, we believe it's a proper one, a real one, right? It's not like a placebo. So I see what he's getting. But if you read the whole context, right? No, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opiate of the masses. And he says in that essay as well, and this is kind of profound. I'll give Marx credit on this one. Marx said the criticism of religion is the beginning of all criticism.
And what does that mean?
So if you want to really begin all criticism and criticize everything else,
you got to do it from the root. And this is it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You got to go after God, which is why they were hell-bent on going after religion. The only word that Marx uses more than criticism is abolition. And those words are all through that opiate of the masses essay. So he got that right. They knew that if you wanted to burn down the village and start all over, you had to take out God, because this is first and foremost a manifesto or an attack on human nature. Pope Benedict XVI, John Paul II, popes all the way back to Pope Pius IX said, especially Benedict and JP2, they said where Marxism really failed isn't even so much philosophical, isn't so much economic, it's anthropological. They fail to understand human nature, such as if your beginning point is that the entire communist program may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property. I mean, think about that. What does that mean? Now, you're in a classroom where some German guy is writing this on the board. Professor, can you stop for a second? Abolition of private property.
Quick question.
Yeah. What does that mean? Right? Yeah. I mean, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal, implies the right to own property. Natural law talks about private property. From the cave to the courthouse, a Judeo-Christian tradition, you have the right to property. If you're going to try to abolish all private property, I can tell you right now, I mean, a 5-year-old walking in here with one of those little propeller hats and a lollipop could, tell you they're going to have to kill 100 million people if they want to abolish private property. I mean, you're going to have a war on your hands. So bad starting point right there.
In the Republic, when they try to figure out what justice is, they talk about seeing it I think at a larger level. I want to do something similar here with maybe, rather than thinking of the state, what would communism look like if we had a little commune? Right. Suppose there's some zombie apocalypse and everybody in here, we find a little group of houses and we're trying to figure out how we can live peaceably together. I'm wondering, what does communism look like in that point? Do we all have to agree? Because that's the thing, we won't all agree.
Sure.
So someone's going to have to tell us that we're all going to agree that all of this is going to be owned collectively.
Right. And even then, a commune is not actually communism, because your commune is probably something you're joining voluntarily. Right. You might have marriage and family in there. You might have religion in there. You might have religious people in there. You don't have all these various things that Marx wants to abolish on the level of entire societies and states.
No, I'm agreeing with you, because what I'm saying is even in that situation, you're going to have somebody from the top down imposing those beliefs on you, that they won't be religion, that they won't be marriage, presumably, that they won't be... Yeah.
One of the...
And you can see how horrific that would be in that small setting, and then you just have to apply that to a nation or the world.
One of the early Yankee utopians, John Humphrey Noyes, who was kicked out of New England by the Puritans, he's like the only one who was religious. He called himself a Bible communist, all right, which shows the danger of all this. He ended up forming the Oneida colony in Oneida, New York. They make famous silverware. In fact, one of the only reasons that utopian colony didn't go bankrupt is they actually had something to sell. But he was redefining marriage. They were doing group marriages, they were doing collective marriages, and they had younger girls being forced to marry older men, which the younger girls didn't like. But right away, they're trying to reinvent marriage.
Yeah.
So he's applying his communism on a sort of cultural level. And again, all of this is really disastrous when you break out of traditional relations, right? He called it the most radical rupture in traditional relations. Once you start tinkering with and taking down these ideas that have been the bulwark of human beings for thousands of years, it gets ugly. It gets messy.
Now, one of the things he says in the manifesto is that, we want to do away with marriage. It seems that he says that. But he says, but look at how y'all engage. Look at how the bourgeoisie engage in marriage. You basically prostitute each other in any way, treat each other like capital, sleep with each other's wives. Yeah, what was his point in saying that? Was it just that, yes, we're trying to do away with marriage, but you've done away with marriage too, or what?
Yeah, he does a lot of that. And in fact, on property, which I'll answer that too, but it's kind of it illustrates the point really well. So he even says on the property issue, he says the theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. And you think to yourself, he doesn't really want to abolish private property.
That's what
then he says this: you are horrified at our intending to do away with private property.
Yes.
And you're thinking, yes, at that point, you're thinking, we are. And you don't really mean that, right? And he says, precisely so. That is just what we intend. And then he doubles down on it. He says it again. And then he goes into one of his diatribes, but the property is already owned by blah, blah,
That's
blah.
right.
And well, some of these things, first of all, it's a vast exaggeration, all right? Vast exaggeration, all right? All kinds of people had private property. And you find, too, that a lot of the poor, which I had been at one point in my life, I didn't have any money at one point when I was in graduate school in the 1990s. Yeah, most people, including the greasers in Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Chicago,
what does that
Mark
mean?
Rudd. Oh, you don't know what that is?
I don't know what
so greasers was like a term for 1950s kind of working class kids.
I see. Okay.
The sons of steel workers and so forth.
Gotcha.
But they all want private property, and they all want to aspire to make a buck. They don't want to demand that the rich guy down the street give them all their money. I mean, why would you go to school and better yourself and borrow money? And most people actually want to work their way up. And these guys assume that whatever the proletariat and the poor are like stuck there forever. It's sort of a helpless view of pathetic lumpen proletariat humanity. If we don't come in to help these slack-jawed rabble, right, they're just going to be walking around, drooling all over themselves, right? So most people, in fact, want freedom. Most people want private property. The idea that a group of individuals could come along and say, literally, to hell with that, we're going to burn it all down because this person has more money than that person or whatever. Oh, so what's this? You already believe that. They already have that. You already treat your lives like prostitutes anyway. Okay, then we should abolish marriage. Great, right? Because of whatever's happening with however some of the bourgeoisie wives are treated. By the way, Marx there is talking about his wife who behind her back.
His back?
Yeah, behind his wife's back.
Oh, I see.
He bedded the housemaid Lenchen, who was lent to Marx's family by Marx's wife Jenny's mom. Jenny grew up with this girl named Lenchen. Maybe you can find a photo of Lenchen and put it up there. And
how do you spell it?
Lenchen, Lenchen. So Jenny grows up with Lenchen. The Marx family is so broke. Jenny and Marx's wife both expressed the wish that, quote, Carl would start earning some capital rather than just writing about it. So the family's giving him as much money as they possibly can because Marx won't earn any money. This book is written for someone like Marx who could have the state give him all of his money, all right? So he's not earning any money, and the family can't, in good conscience, no one could give him any more money because he just squanders it. Drinks a bottle of booze, whatever he does with it. So the family says, okay, we'll lend them Lenchen. So they lend him Lenchen, the family nursemaid. She becomes the Marx family's nursemaid. And Marx had sex with her.
Who doesn't bathe, right? Got her pregnant. One of the Marx biographers, Payne, thinks that it wasn't consensual, but I don't know how he could know that.
Sure.
She got pregnant. She had a child. Marx denied that the child was his. Everyone knew that the child was Marx's, including Marx's wife, Jenny. This really crushed Jenny. Engels, being Marx's sugar daddy and kind of sap, who doesn't believe in marriage and who lives with women and refuses to marry any of the women that he lives with, and these poor women all want Engels to marry them to make honest women out of them. So Engels says, "All right, I know it's Carl's kid. I will accept paternity for the child, and we will name him Friedrich." And the kid became known as Freddie. Marx refused to ever acknowledge the existence of the kid, refused to ever pay a penny of child support, and Marx also refused to ever pay Lenchen any money. So she never got any money. This champion of the proletariat never paid any money to Lenchen at all. It's typical of kind of Marx family values. Engels and Marx wrote in The Origins of the Family that in their ideal society, housekeeping would become a government-run industry, a nationalized affair, and all children would immediately be put into government collective schools. One of the first things the Bolsheviks did in the Soviet Union was abolish all private schools, all homeschooling, and all religious education, and put everyone in the giant secular collective schools. Point 10 in the Communist Manifesto calls for free education for all children in public schools. Marx made fun of what he called the hallowed correlation between parent and child. He said that's a bunch of bourgeois claptrap.
But see, after he says free education for all children in public schools, he says abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. So that could be seen as children are being sent to these factories. We need to educate them.
Yeah, sure.
Is that the more sympathetic way of looking at it?
Yeah, I think so. And in America, right, any progressives watching, the progressive movement in the early 1900s, one of the things that they did best was eliminate child labor and had regulations. Woodrow Wilson, who was an intensely anti-communist progressive. So the point is, you can fix child abuse and labor without becoming a communist, right? You don't have to abolish the family, all eternal truth, morality, all states, all societies, and private property, and everything else to take care of that issue. So again, Marx to get that right, but
I have some more devil's advocate to play here.
Yeah, sure. Marx would love that.
Okay, so it seems that these as it's being presented today. Let me start in a different way. Okay, so basically, when I think of the Communist Manifesto, what's interesting to me is not Marx as a person and his life and his philosophy, because it seems to me it's not really even a philosophical book. What's interesting to me is how did this manifesto spread the way it did? What appealed to the heart of the reader? Why is the human heart such that this is such an appealing ideal? And then my other question, I guess, would be, it seems like in the conversation so far, communism is being presented as this great abolition of private property, which we've already talked about as kind of like, you have to have a government, you have to have some kind of system. You can't really have no such thing as property. Maybe it's public property, but if that's what communism is, then kind of what are we criticizing here? Is that what people who call themselves communists want? Do they want no more private property? Do they want no system of government? Do they want everyone to be pushed into some warehouse and taught states rules until they're 18 and then what would a communist be?
One of the things that Lenin wrote, and so it really becomes Marxism-Leninism when it's first implemented. But Lenin said, now don't think that when we talk about abolition of private property and public property and common ownership of means of production, that this actually means that people are going to own all the stuff, right? The state is obviously going to run it. I mean, that's the way that it's going to work. Lenin wrote a famous essay called "What Is to Be Done," which is the great question. Yeah, what do you do once you abolish all the private property? And if you're not going to have a state, or the state withers away and ceases to exist, who's going to redistribute all the stuff? This doesn't just like magically happen, right? Who's going to be in charge? And Lenin stepped forward and said, well, of course, what this means is you're going to need a vanguard. You're going to need a kind of educated elite class or group, not only to raise the consciousness of the proletariat and everybody else, but in order to have the power to do all of this. Right. And you're also going to need, because there are these dialectical stages in the revolution, you're going to need somebody to call the shots at a certain point and say, okay. We've now left serfdom, and we've now left feudalism, and we've now left capitalism. We're now in socialism. We're now on our final transitionary step to communism. Here we are now, and now we do this. You're going to need people to make those decisions and call those shots. But if you read Marx, there's just this kind of magic withering away. It's really almost religious, the way these things happen. Here, this is one of my favorite quotes from Marx that I think says it all. In communist society, where nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity, but each one can become accomplished in any branch he wishes. Now listen to this very carefully, all right? Society regulates the general production. Got it? Okay, society regulates the general production, okay?
Okay.
And thus, okay, this is all you need. What happens after society regulates general production? And thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. To do all that, to be a hunter, a fisherman, a farmer, rear cattle, everything, all you need is for society to regulate general production. And that's the key to utopia. So if we could just have this elite group of managers right, that could do this. Everything will be all right. You will have the new Jerusalem. There's a stunning statement from Margaret Sanger.
It's like parents taking care of children. It's like, we'll take care of everything, and you, son and daughter, will be free to do the things that you wish to do. But you have to trust us,
right.
And we're allowed to impose certain things upon you and discipline.
Whoever the thus may be. And then however they come into being, however they come into power. Margaret Sanger made a trip to Bolshevik Russia in 1934. She wrote about it in her Birth Control Review, and it's called Birth Control in Soviet Russia. And she was stunned at the number of abortions that were taking place in Moscow. She couldn't believe it. She was actually horrified by it.
Wow.
And she said, however, of all the communist officials that I spoke to, they say that once a fully functioning communistic society is in place, neither abortion nor birth control will be necessary. So all you need is the fully functioning communist society in place, and then you won't even need abortion.
Why?
And birth control.
Why? Because people are sharing with each other, and there's no scarcity?
Hypothetical angels, right? These like perfect, almost Edenic managers.
Guardians,
Yeah, they will, because they're using the ideology of communism, will make everything good. It's like Benedict said, it's like they would usher in the new Jerusalem. And Pope Benedict said, what Marx really got wrong is he thinks that if you solve the economic problem, all other problems will be solved. But the mistake that he made is, as Jesus said to Satan, man does not live by bread alone. You know, Augustine said there's a God-shaped vacuum in each of us. There's not a dollar-shaped vacuum in each of us. Marx and Engels believe if we could just solve the capital problem, or wait a second, the private property problem, or no, the family, marriage, all eternal truths, all traditional relations, all society, whether all those problems, right? If we could just solve all of that, right? Then we will have the new Jerusalem.
I think I can answer your first question, which is, why is this so appealing to people? I think it's because it locates the evil of the world to some other group of people than me. So if I am so disappointed with my life and I feel frustrated because I haven't been able to actualize what I want, and then you come along and say, it's not your fault, it's their fault.
Yeah.
All of a sudden I have this community of people to rally with, and then to inflict pain on the evil that's...
You're the victim and they're the bad guys.
Yeah, how could you not see how that's appealing?
So it fosters envy.
Yeah.
It fosters resentment.
Envy's appealing.
Yeah, that's right. It's based on vice, viciousness.
Yeah.
There's no virtue in there. And the first question you had asked too about why would it appeal to people, I don't think it ever really has. And there are not democratically elected communist regimes. I mean, the Bolsheviks took over in October 1917 only because the Tsar had abdicated and the provisional government collapsed. Read Richard Pipes' The Russian Revolution. People were shocked that the Bolsheviks took over. And then by force, through the Soviet Comintern, they tried taking over countries. And of all the countries that became communist, I mean, none of them stood for democratic elections. Cuba under Fidel Castro and Raul Castro, they've never stood for elected leadership. I mean, Castro promised in January 1959, came to the United States, April 17th, 1959, told Meet the Press and Congress and all these other groups, we are for democracy, we are for free and fair elections. They've never held free elections because they know that people wouldn't elect them. And by the way, knowing that, if they knew that people would elect him, they would stand for elections and then get elected. And then that would help them. They could end the embargo and all sorts of things. But these are all totalitarian dictatorial regimes. Pol Pot, Castro, the Kims in North Korea, Mao, all the countries behind the Iron Curtain. So that should tell people something too. Name me the communist regime that's not a dictatorship. Right? You could, when you look at the ideas that are in here, you say to yourself, you're only going to be able to abolish private property and do these other things through a dictatorship.
Yeah, through an imposition of force.
It's common sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, through
Unless
force.
everybody just decides to give it up. And that's the difference between a monastery, right? Like in a monastery, you willingly give away your property and choose to submit to an elder and to share things in common.
And it's based on religion. You also have freedom of religion. That's right.
How important was the thought of Hegel in that of Marx? Because he was a contemporary of Marx. He lived prior to him. I've heard that the Hegelian dialect somehow influenced him. I'm also seeing, though, that he's a contemporary of Darwin and Nietzsche, and there seems to be a common strand of thought throughout these characters, and I wonder if you agree and if you could explicate that.
Yeah, wow. There's they love Darwin. In fact, Engels at Marx's funeral in 1883 quoted Darwin in his eulogy. And he said that Marx has done for the social sciences, right, what Darwin did for the natural sciences. So he's applied this evolutionary idea using Hegel's idea of the dialectic, which is really just kind of a fancy way of saying that history over time would go through these progressive stages, kind of one after another, each happening on a higher plane that eventually evolves into this kind of final destination. Mm-hmm. For Hegel, it was this ideational dialectic. For Marx, it was this materialistic dialectic based on economics. But so Engels said the glory of Marx is that they call this scientific socialism, or scientific communism, to try to put this veneer of science to what Marx was doing. So history is not progressing through this kind of series of stages and the idea, the Christian idea, that all eventually leads to the second coming of Christ. But instead, this atheistic, materialist dialectic that goes on stage over time. And so Marx quoted Darwin, or Engels quoted Darwin at Marx's funeral. Engels quoted Darwin at Marx's wife Jenny's funeral and gives this really depressing eulogy about here lived the vivacious Jenny, right? So full of life. And there he is kind of brooding over her coffin, right? Now she becomes, I don't know, what do you say, Matt? Worm food, right? How wonderful, how uplifting that is. But they were all Darwinists. Trotsky, who was the cohort of Vladimir Lenin, the Bolshevik Revolution, said the idea of evolution and determinism took possession of me completely. Darwin stood for me like a mighty doorkeeper at the entrance of the temple of the universe. I was intoxicated by his thought. And here's Marx himself in his 1844 essay, Private Property and Communism. Natural science will in time incorporate into itself the science of man, just as the science of man will incorporate into itself natural science. There will be one science. So he saw what he was doing as scientific, fully rational. But in a way, this is more religious than a lot of religions. Ronald Reagan used to say communism, that religion of theirs. Raymond Aron called it Marxism, the opium of the intellectuals. Ooh. But this idea that Arthur Koestler in Darkness at Noon and The God That Failed, he was an ex-communist. And he said, you got to understand, for the convert to communism, it's like all the pieces of the universe suddenly fall into place. And, there is no leaving the faith, right? There's this rapturous joy that you've solved all the riddles of the universe. I don't know how anybody could feel that way about communism, but a lot of these people, these atheistic adherents, did. And yet at the same time, the irony is they made fun of religious people and called them idiots and morons, but they're just as religious as your Catholic grandmother working her rosary. Yeah. Right? I mean, these guys are really, they put all their faith in this kind of earthly utopia.
Have you ever read The Devils by Dostoevsky? Mm-hmm. There's a great deal of talk of communism there.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And he's almost, right on par. They were born a few years apart between him and Marx. So was this revolution taking place in Russia while he's writing The Devils, sparked by Marx?
Well, there's a lot going on in Russia throughout the 1800s. I have to look up when Dostoevsky, this is like 1880.
Well, let's see.
Right?
So Marx was born in 1818. Dostoevsky was born in 1821.
Yeah, right. And when did Dostoevsky die?
1881.
Okay, yeah. So
and Marx is 1883.
Right, that's right. And the manifesto was published in 1848. Engels, I think, died 1895. So all of this is going on at the time. And again, the church, right? I mean, the Catholic Church is issuing statement after statement. Pope Pius IX did Qui Pluribus in 1846, did several other encyclicals. And then Leo XIII in 1878.
Yeah.
And on to 1903, a whole bunch of statements as well. And Pius X listed it in his syllabus of errors. They referred to communism as pestilential, pests. They're just the strongest language. The 1937 Pius XI encyclical Divini Redemptoris called communism a satanic scourge orchestrated by the sons of darkness. And said the communism was demonic.
Which pope was it? Maybe Leo XIII, who said you cannot be a Catholic and a socialist.
That was Pope Pius XI in Quadragesimo Anno, 1931.
Okay.
One cannot be at the same time a socialist and a Catholic.
I see.
Yeah, the two are incompatible.
Okay, now I think what bothers people when we go after communism is they think that we're necessarily extolling capitalism in all of its forms and celebrating all of its outcomes.
Exactly.
Now, John Paul II in Centesimus Annus, is that you say it?
Which was done on the 100th anniversary of Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum.
Right.
So that's what that means, 100 years since henceforth. Yes. And Quadragesimo Anno was 40 years after Rerum Novarum.
I want to quote...
So those three are all connected.
I want to quote paragraph 42 because the first thing is often kind of cited by those who would champion capitalism. He says, can it perhaps be said that after the failure of communism, capitalism is the victorious social system and that capitalism should be the goal of the countries now making efforts to rebuild their economy and society? If by capitalism is meant an economic system which recognizes the fundamental and positive role of business, the market, private property, and the resulting responsibility for the means of production, as well as free human creativity in the economic sector, then the answer is certainly in the affirmative, even though it would perhaps be more appropriate to speak of a business economy, market economy, or simply free economy. This one short quote. Because then he says this, but if by capitalism is meant a system in which freedom in the economic sector is not circumscribed within a strong juridical framework which places it at the service of human freedom in its totality and sees it as a particular aspect of that freedom, the core of which is ethical and religious, then the reply is certainly negative. So maybe help those who are listening who have questions, maybe not even full-out critiques, but just questions about capitalism.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
It's a beautiful statement. And I'm so glad you brought this up because for anyone says, well, you're a capitalist. I'm not a capitalist. I mean, I've heard people say that Marx invented the term capitalism. I don't know for sure. But the idea that you and I might be capitalists. What do we worship capital? I don't care about capital. I mean,
what is capital? What is capital? Money, property. What does capital mean?
I think it might refer to, in his sense, as maybe the means of production, maybe factories, farms, things that are owned, currency. Perhaps, right? I don't know. You have to really drill down on what actually Das Kapital, right? I mean, he talks about it, but the thing is, I tell people all the time, I'm not a capitalist. I mean, I'm just kind of a general free marketer. I believe in private property, and in freedom to engage in commerce, right? Free exchange of ideas, currency, the right to start a business, lower regulations, lower taxes, and I'm not against the state doing some things to help the poor, Social Security, workers' comp, welfare even, right? But limited to a certain amount of time, maybe like 2 years or whatever. So I'm not against those things, but so they often set up a caricature, right, and call it capitalism, and kind of contrast their communism to that. But I don't know anybody really, even including my Wall Street friends, who call themselves capitalists, right? They're kind of general free marketers. So I think that in itself is a straw man that they've gotten away with. They've tried to take I think, what most of us would consider ourselves free marketers and accuse us of following this ism. No, they're the ism people. They're doing communism. They're doing Marxism, Leninism.
But given that modern day communists wouldn't ascribe to much of what Marx said, aren't we strawmanning them by focusing so much on Marx instead of dealing with what they believe today?
Well, I mean, we could deal with their arguments and their points and their beliefs on separate issues.
Sure.
And in fact, all right, to sort of bring this forward to today, Communist Party USA, which was founded in Chicago, September 1919, which at its peak had about 60,000 members in the 1930s. There's debates on this, 50,000 to 100,000, but there's an FBI report from 1948, which really did a deep dive and said about 60,000 communists in the United States. By the way, it said 30,000 of them lived in New York City alone. One of them was Bella Dodd. We could talk about later. But so there are about 60,000 communists. Today, Communist Party USA has about 5,000 members. That's it. Out of 300 million people in this country, 5,000 members. But where the action is the group called the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA. And they have, according to their most recent convention report, 94,512 comrades, as they call them. And if you go to the website of the Democratic Socialists of America,
doing it,
they call themselves, quote, the largest socialist organization in the United States, unquote. They have not changed that. That's been up there on the lead website for 10 years now. By the way, the DSA was founded by a Catholic, Michael Harrington, in the 1980s. And today, if you follow the DSA, they're very secular. If not, they don't say that they're atheistic, but they're not Catholic for sure. I mean, they're not religious. Coming out of the DSA is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. The most far-left members of Congress are DSA members who have now been running for office as Democrats. But so they're crafting what they call democratic socialism, which is
put the best possible spin on that before you critique it. How would she define that?
They define it at their website. All right. And if you, I don't know if you have it handy.
Well, I'm here. Let's see. About us.
Yeah, about us.
What is democratic socialism?
All right.
All right. Here, I'll stop every few sentences and you can say what you think. Capitalism is a system designed by the owning class to exploit the rest of us for their own profit.
Okay, now stop right there, all right? So is that us? Or are we, America, a capitalist system where what? The owning class?
System. Yeah, who is the owning class?
Well, the owning class in America is probably all these people. Oh, believe me, it's AOC. I mean, those people they have money. Bernie Sanders has money. Bernie Sanders has homes. I mean, a lot of the owning class in America today is teachers and people who have pensions, and their pensions are based on what they own through what's invested in Wall Street.
It's simplistic, isn't it?
It's so it is
the owning class
so
to exploit
simplistic.
the rest of us. Now, if you're reading that, you're like, yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
I'm the rest of us.
Right.
Definitely not one of those dirty capitalists.
Yeah, I don't feel whoever those dirty guys are. Would it be Elon Musk, Buffett? I don't feel any antagonism toward those guys at all. They have a literal gazillion more dollars than me. Great, I don't care. I'm not upset about it. Are you?
Well, we're not upset about it, but we're not in any way destitute. Neither are the people writing this. But I mean, maybe
right.
I'd be a little more
on their
upset
computers.
if I had no money and felt I had no options. I might then look at people who had insane amount of money.
Which I think shows how divisive these people are, because they go to that guy and say, this isn't your fault. This is the fault of this capitalist scum, right? The owning class.
You got a great voice when you said capitalist scum. I think I would like you to do a bedtime story where you read the Communist Manifesto and we put it on Hallow.
Right. Yeah, Vladimir Lenin, these capitalist reptiles.
Scum. All right, let's see. We must replace it with democratic socialism, a system where ordinary people, wait, that's not me, I'm not ordinary. No. Have a real voice in our workplaces, neighborhoods, and society.
Now, what does that mean? What is that?
I suppose what it means
I want to see, I'm a business guy, right?
Yeah.
I don't own a business, but I have more of a business mind. What do you mean by that?
Exactly.
What does that look like?
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Who's it speaking to? Is it speaking to people who feel that they have no power in their local area? But the one thing that won't help that is top-down government dictatorship. Like, that's the opposite of subsidiarity.
And what's the voice? What's the voice?
And not just a voice, a real voice.
A real voice.
So basically, maybe what they're saying is these big bureaucracies, and maybe I can relate to this, like pretend you have a voice.
Right, yeah.
Like, we really value your feedback. No, you don't at all.
I would say the bigger the government and the more government control, the more you feel like you don't have a voice.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I mean, the more freedom you have and the more right to own private property, in a sense, the
more responsibility you have over the thing that you own.
Right. Rather than having a managerial class that redistributes it.
We believe there are many avenues that feed into the democratic road to socialism. Our vision pushes further than historic social democracy and leaves behind authoritarian visions of socialism in the dustbin of history. Okay, what does that mean there?
Well, the dustbin of history is Lenin's famous phrase. But yeah, authoritarian. Yeah. You're going to need authoritarian control to do socialism.
Are you? Because they're saying you don't.
Yeah, that's the way it is.
Paul?
I mean,
it says it's going to leave behind the authoritarian visions of socialism. So is that a critique of socialism? There is that what that is?
I think
thought up by Marx and others.
They are they're criticizing how they want to frame up.
Our vision
socialism
pushes further than historic social democracy and leaves behind authoritarian visions of socialism in the dustbin of history. We want a democracy that creates space for us all to flourish, not just survive, and answers the fundamental question of our lives with the input of all. Okay, I don't know if I want everybody answering the fundamental question of my life.
And even then, a lot of those are just sort of
fluffy words.
Yeah, they're general platitudes. Yeah. That's kind of general
Water
language.
Is life.
That
love is love.
I want to know, what does that mean? Okay, so I want to know, what tax rates do you want to do that? We have a progressive income tax in the United States, and the upper rate is around 39%. What would you like that to be to do that?
I see.
And I bet they say, like 80 to 90%.
And
give us some specifics.
Because I don't know. Bernie Sanders isn't really in the limelight anymore, but would he be the kind of poster child for this?
He would, yeah. And
so how did he kind of respond to those very specific questions about how much do you want to tax us to get this accomplished?
Well, and Bernie Sanders, people don't get this. I mean, Bernie Sanders ran for president for the Democrats in 2016 and 2020, but he's always been an independent in the Senate. Bernie's a lifetime socialist. In 1980 and 1984, 1980, when Americans are choosing between Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, Bernie Sanders' party, which he was a formal presidential elector to, was the Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party, the SWP. I don't think Bernie ever actually joined the SWP. We've tried to figure that out, but he spoke for them and was a formal presidential elector for this. He was a supporter. So he's very much a socialist. By the way, if I could give you a quote here,
please.
I don't know if this is totally off subject, but Mussolini.
All right,
okay.
Let's do it.
And Mussolini, who's referred to as a right-wing fascist.
I just want to, before you read the quote, real quickly, those who are watching right now, thanks for being here. We've almost got 300,000 subscribers. Right now we don't. When we hit that, I will finally be happy. So if you could click that would help, that subscribe button. Also, if you are a local supporter, go ask a question for Dr. Kengor, because we're going to get to some questions soon. So the only way to ask your questions is either to send in a super chat or to go over to locals and post your question there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Mussolini.
Well, Mussolini and Hitler are both often called far right, but they were both socialists. And in fact, Hitler, the party, Nazi meant National Socialist German Workers' Party. All right, that doesn't sound like, Ronald Reagan or Ludwig von Mises or Milton Friedman, all right? National Socialist German Workers' Party. And by the way, did he oppose the communists? Oh, yeah. But you get socialists and communists. You get the Bolsheviks come out of a 1903 meeting of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, and they split into the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. So the Bolsheviks called themselves the majority, and they called the Mensheviks the minority. But they came out of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. So you get these people in a room together. They'll go at each other's throats over little tiny different issues that they disagree with. But Mussolini, who's also considered by people historically on the left and everything as a right winger, he was a Marxist, and he referred to Marx as, quote, the father and teacher and the magnificent philosopher of working class violence. So he was a Marxist. And look at this quote that will really confuse everybody. Mussolini, fascism is for liberty. It is for the only kind of liberty that is serious, the liberty of the state. Because for the fascist, all is comprised in the state, and nothing spiritual or human exists. Much less has any value outside the state. So this is how they can just destroy these words.
Yes.
Fascism is for liberty, right? Fascism is the state.
Is it 1984?
It's for the liberty of the state. Exactly.
Freedom is something.
That's exactly right. So they use the state and the power of the state for their Marxist or socialistic means. And so I would warn the people at the Democratic Socialists of America, right? You may say that you're against authoritarianism, and I commend you for that. But the more that you want your state to do in order for this group of oppressed, right, to be assuaged from these attackers, from these capitalists, you're going to have to give power to the state. And in order to take down a few pegs, this owning class, you're going to have to take away some of their property, which probably means their capital, which probably means taxing their income, which means redistributing by the fiat of the state to do that. And so that's why I ask, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I want to see it put to paper how you're going to do that. Don't just give me this gobbledygook.
Yeah, because one thing that struck me as a layman reading the Communist Manifesto was, okay, so you've got the proletariat, who are much more numerous than the bourgeoisie. We are going to take the private property of the bourgeoisie and somehow inherit it for a time. But if there's a lot more of the proletariat than the bourgeoisie, you're not all fitting into their private property. So who's kind of agreeing to live in the nice places while the others choose not to?
Right.
And the point is, the practical application isn't there.
And especially
tearing
today.
down something, that's attractive. Let's blow this thing up. Yeah.
In fact,
then how do you build it?
So using these definitions, I would say in America today, there's more bourgeoisie than proletariat, especially if you're defining bourgeoisie as like the owning class that these people are doing.
Yeah.
I mean, far more people in America are owners and private property owners.
Class.
Yeah.
Neil is my proletariat.
Yeah, right. He's your wage slave.
Unless he hires somebody.
But Neil owns stuff.
Damn it,
right?
Neil.
And as soon as he
couldn't do that.
As soon as he becomes a homeowner, is he a bad guy? Is he part of the owning class?
Yeah, then he would be, I suppose. Certainly if he was to rent anything.
Right. And so in America today, the bourgeoisie, so defined in these crazy categories, might be a lot bigger than the proletariat. There's not that many people even that are working in the steel. I drove across the bridge the Allegheny coming here today, right? Those old steel mills, they're shut down now.
Yeah.
A lot of them are working at home on their computers and their laptops in homes that they own.
Here's the
thanks to capitalism.
Here's the final line from the DSA. We want a democracy powered by everyday people. Yeah. Again, that's got to be me. I'm definitely one of those.
Hey, that sounds great.
Yeah. The capitalist class tells us we are powerless, but together we can take back control.
Yeah. Well, do they know that Lenin was a big supporter of democracy? And Engels was a big supporter of democracy. In fact, let me give you Lenin's definition. Lenin said, democracy means equality, he said.
Say that again.
Democracy means equality.
Okay.
Now, Bella Dodd, who was a member of Communist Party USA, said, oh, yeah, democracy. They always talk about that, meaning communists. She said, when the communists talk of democracy, when the socialists talk of democracy, they mean economic democracy. See, we hear that and we think, oh, yeah, founding fathers, man. Jefferson, freedom of speech, freedom of press, Bill of Rights, right? But Lenin said, yeah, I support democracy. Democracy means equality. Democracy is of enormous importance to the working class in its struggle against the capitalists for its emancipation. But democracy is only one of the stages on the road from feudalism to capitalism and from capitalism to communism. And Engels said this, democracy would be wholly valueless to the proletariat, get this, if it were not immediately used as a means for putting through measures directed against private property. So they wanted to use democracy in order to go against private property. Mm-hmm. That's how they saw it. And he even talked about America, Engels did. In America, where a democratic constitution has already been established, the communists must make common cause with the party, which will turn this constitution against the bourgeoisie and use it in the interest of the proletariat. So democracy, and even like our constitution, are tools to be exploited. So American communists would sit there before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, and they'd be asked, "Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?" And what would they do? They'd cite the Constitution. They'd invoke the Fifth Amendment, the right against self-incrimination, which made anti-communists furious because they knew these guys were literally sworn to the Soviet Union, and if they ever took over the United States, the first thing they were going to put through the shredder was the U.S. Constitution. So they use these things as a temporary means in order to do what they want to do with their larger project.
Do us a favor, quickly define the difference, or define communism, socialism, and Marxism. And then, if it's okay, I want to go through the 10 outcomes of communism as outlined in the manifesto, and just have you offer a brief reply to each 10 points. But yeah, these distinctions between communism, socialism, and Marxism.
Yeah, I'm glad I brought my computer with me so I can give you this stuff verbatim. I usually just do it off the top of my head.
No, it's helpful. Thank you.
So the book, the definition on this comes from Lenin, a book he did in 1917 called The State and Revolution. And he issued it in September 1917, never finished it completely. It's a long tome, but running the violent state got in the way of finishing the book. But he gives a definition there. Okay, and here it is.
All right.
This is right from the horse's mouth. This is Lenin. And this brings us to the question of the scientific distinction between socialism and communism.
All right.
All right, everybody's like, okay, good, here it is. Here it is from Lenin. What is usually called socialism was termed by Marx the first or lower phase of communist society. Insofar as the means of production becomes common property, the word communism is also applicable here, providing that we do not forget that this is not complete communism. So Marx and Lenin are both saying that socialism is the first or lower phase of communist society. So the dialectic of history, you'd go from slavery to feudalism, to capitalism, to socialism, to communism. So socialism is the final transitionary step to communism. Marion Smith of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation used to say, as the Christian aspires to heaven, the socialist aspires to communism. Which is a good definition because it's like a religion to them. Now, here's where it gets a little messy. Today's socialists, right, will say, well, I don't want communism. I'm a democratic socialist, and then they'll kind of redefine it. But in terms of Marxist-Leninist theory, socialism leads to communism. We're now in if you type in Google communism, Merriam-Webster will say common ownership of the means of production. At least it said that forever until about a year or two. Now they've got they're playing with it, man. I mean, the different definitions, but we're now in a society where people are redefining marriage. They're redefining their gender. I mean, there's Google has over 70 different definitions of gender. So leave it to these folks today to come up with their own new definitions of socialism. It's just kind of a train wreck in trying to define anything today. But according to Marxist-Leninist theory, socialism is the final transitionary step to communism.
All right, let's go through these 10 outcomes of communism as laid down in the manifesto, and if you're able, let's try to give a brief.
It's the 10-point plan, the 10 goals. Yeah,
the 10 goals. So let's, if you can try to give a brief response to each, otherwise this would take far too long. But the first goal of communism, as outlined, is the abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purpose.
Yeah. Well, there you go. But it starts off the first of the 10 points, right? Abolition of property in land. Yeah, application of all rents of land to public. It kind of speaks for itself.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like double down, tripling down, quadrupling down on abolition of property.
What might that look like if that happened right now? I don't own my house anymore. You don't own your house anymore.
Yeah.
So presumably no one can take your house from you except the state.
Yeah.
So the state really, it's not like we all own everything.
That's right. Imagine doing that.
And it's not that no one owns anything. It's that the state owns everything.
Right. That's what Lenin said. It doesn't actually mean that the people commonly own the stuff. I mean, but Lenin's like, you got to be stupid to think that. But if you tried to do that today, it's impossible. which is why my point is, I'm sorry. I know this sounds insulting and demeaning, but I don't know how anybody today could be a communist. You've got to look at this and say this is not possible. Period.
To be fair, I think a lot of communists today would say that of that first point, wouldn't you say? Like AOC's not.
I would hope
calling
so,
for the abolition of private property.
I read them and I've watched them online, and they will argue for this and that, and kind of it's just a non-starter.
Yeah. All right, well, let's scratch that.
You can maybe try this in 1848, but in America today, forget it. Which again is why a lot of modern communists are doing gender Marxism, new victim class, critical race theory. I mean, today it's just pure sophistry.
All right, let's get rid of that one. Give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Two
is one of my all-time favorites.
But like 2, I can see why socialists today would push for this: a heavy progressive and graduated income tax. All right, so just look.
Yeah.
It would be nice if people were all living in a way where they all had opportunity, they all had houses and cars, and it seems unfair that certain people should have yachts and private jets, and other people have to eke out a living working at Kroger and renting. That's unfair. So if we had something like this, then we could distribute the wealth.
Well, we do now. That's what's fascinating about this. I remember the first time that I learned that, I was reading an old Reagan speech, and he said, our progressive graduated income tax right out of the Communist Manifesto. And I said, I was just a hyperbole by Reagan, right? Because I had never actually read the Communist Manifesto, even though I majored in political science and went to graduate school and all this other stuff.
For those at home, what does it
like
mean?
Like people who go to law school and don't read the Constitution, which happens all the time, by the way. It's totally true.
I believe you. Maybe it's self-explanatory, but for those at home, progressive or graduated income tax, what does that mean?
We got in America and progressives today speak like this is etched on the Liberty Bell in 1776. We got our progressive graduated income tax in America in 1913. It required amending the Constitution with the 16th Amendment to make it possible. So we now have a permanent federal tax on income, and it's graduated or progressive, which means if you make, like, let's say $0 to $20,000 a year, you'd pay 0% income tax. 20 to 40, 10%, 40 to 60, 15%. It gets higher and higher and higher. I think the top rate is 36% or 39.6. When Ronald Reagan was an actor in California, the top rate was 94%. 94%.
Wow.
I know, look it up. People won't believe it. The FDR actually wanted during World War II, and this is in Bert Folsom's book, Bert and Anita Folsom's book, FDR Goes to War. FDR actually wanted a 99% federal income tax on income over $100,000.
Wow.
And people can look it up. This is on video. People are going to check it. He wanted 99% on income over $100,000. So once you get over that next, over $100,000, 99,000 goes to the federal government just for the income tax. That's aside from any state income tax, sales tax, property taxes, inheritance tax, all that stuff.
So if Marx knew this about America, he would have been happy with this.
Yeah, he probably would have. And by the way, that top rate was moved down to 70% by JFK. And then Reagan took it eventually down to 28%. When Reagan was finished in 1989, When Reagan came in, there were 16 tax brackets. So you'd be taxed at that level, all the way, 16 of them. When Reagan left, there were two rates, 28% and 15%. And some people in America have pushed for just a flat tax of like 20%, 15%. But since Reagan left, it's now gone up again, and I think it's like 36 or 39.
Just to clarify too,
yeah,
it's because I have them all pulled up now. Basically, looking at this, it seems like what has happened is not that there is one top wealth bracket that's like, this is, arguably it's basically the top wealth bracket has basically been cut off. So not necessarily that these people that used to be paying 70% only have to pay 39%. It's that bracket has been cut off. So they're now clumped in with the group behind them. And you can argue about that a little bit with inflation and stuff, but the top bracket, that's the 70%, is for $200,000, and that's in 1974. $200,000 in today's money is like over $1 million.
Yeah.
There's no bracket like that today. The highest bracket today is for head of household.
And for people who say
$600,000.
For people who say, well, the poor pay more in taxes than the rich. No, just look at that chart. if you're under like 25,000, you're in the bottom tax bracket. You might pay 10%, right? As compared to the wealthier people pay like 36, 39%. So you do pay higher at a higher level.
What would you like to see happen if you could?
I'd like to see a flat tax. And then again, the people who think emotionally about this stuff, well, that wouldn't be fair. Then the poor would pay the same percentage as the rich. Yeah, they pay the same percentage. It's 20%. But if you make $2 million a year,
you're paying a lot more.
You pay a lot more than if you make $2,000 a year. Yeah, no, do math.
I'm going to push back a little bit here.
Use a calculator.
I'll
or
say
something.
it's
this is Neil's last show
one,
before he goes to. So this is where he comes out as a full-on commie.
Right. Well, I will say this is a little bit less. To me, it seems strange that there is no higher tax bracket above 600,000. It just stops.
That is strange, isn't it?
Okay, but I will say this. I've written down a few things that are like the actual concrete things that I think of people thinking when they say they're communists or socialists or whatever.
Yep.
This is one of them, is they say, well, there does seem to be a way which people can exploit workers, right? You can have a system where you exploit workers. You can put in a Walmart and put all the small businesses out of business and then raise the prices. And you're in control. There's money going to corporations rather than local people. This is about like distributism, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So it seems to me that the argument isn't that rich people should pay more money because they're rich and we want them to pay more money. The idea is that the way to get that rich seems to be about using the work of people, and this is kind of a counterbalance of that.
Yeah.
And you can, I think these are all legitimate conversations and debates, right, in a functioning free market society about what would be the best tax brackets and so forth. I think I detest the property tax, because you could have, some little old lady who lives in, we're in this area going closer to Pittsburgh, like Fox Chapel, Upper St. Clair, who's now 80 years old, doesn't work, and who lives on Social Security and maybe whatever money she inherited and her husband's dead. And she might have to pay $30,000 a year in property taxes. $2,500 a month just in property taxes. And what I don't like about it too is it assumes that the county or the state owns the property. Who's she paying it to? They don't own that property. She bought it. Her husband bought it. So I would say, I hate they come up with another form of tax. Do a higher sales tax if you want to, but I don't like that one. The other one I detest, and it's 0.3, right? Is the inheritance tax.
Before we get to that, it sounds like you're saying that you can have legitimate questions about the way things are, but the one solution that won't work is communism. So come up with something else, and that could be a spectrum of different opinions and options. Yeah, but it's not the state.
And one of the worst ideas in history is abolition of private property. That's madness. You're gonna have 100 million dead on your hands if you do that.
And have, right?
That's exactly right.
I would just say it seems like what I see a lot is things like bigger tax brackets and stuff like that. People do call that kind of thing communism, and they say that's communism. Communism is bad because it's about the abolition of property. But it seems like there does need to be a distinction. Yeah. The Marxist communism that's in the manifesto, I think is criticizing that is different from criticizing
today's
ideas. Yeah,
100%.
Every
I
single
agree
idea
with
that
that.
people call
And by the way, to have complete redistribution of wealth and common ownership of the means of production and abolition of private property, what kind of tax rates are you going to need to have complete leveling of all this stuff? I mean, you think that through.
Are we attacking a straw man here by even looking to Marx as if he is the expositor of the communist doctrine? I mean, there's been a lot of development in Darwinian theory. If we were to sit here today and try to critique it and just critique what Darwin wrote, that seems like that would be to critique a straw man.
Yeah.
Are we falling into that here?
Well, and there's Marxism, Leninism, there's Maoism, there's these different variations or strains.
We have to pick something.
But here we are in 2022, and in July 2019, America Magazine, which is the American Catholic Jesuit magazine, published an article called "The Catholic Case for Communism."
What did you think of it?
I was floored. I was on vacation in New Jersey, and I got an email from Tom, the producer of Drew Mariani's show on Relevant Radio, and said, "I know you're on vacation, but could you come on and talk about this?"
I get a lot of calls from him saying the same thing.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah,
and that would have been under the 1949 Papal Decree against communism under Pius XII, they would have been literally excommunicated for that.
And then I think they did a follow-up piece why we wrote an article defending communism.
Yeah. In fact, there was an editor, a note from the editor, Father Malone, I think, on why we published a piece called "The Catholic Case." And people ask,
you got blowback. Right? You got to do that.
Yeah, and the picture that goes with it is Evo Morales, the tin horn crackpot of Bolivia, handing a communist crucifix to Pope Francis. And Francis is smiling. It's a communist crucifix? And by the way, Francis said in December 2013, the Marxist ideology is wrong. So he has rejected it.
That's nice.
But I collect this stuff. He hasn't said a word more. And he's not a Marxist, but he's definitely not strong on it. He's not strongly.
Okay, at least not strong.
Yeah,
Fair enough. Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
but if there's,
no, good. I don't care.
If there's
That's
someone
no
who claims himself or thinks of themselves as a Catholic communist watching right now, and they're like, by darn it, I'm going to come on and I'll debate this guy.
Yeah, well, the church has said you can't be a Catholic and a communist.
Would you be open to a debate if someone?
You know, I'm not afraid to debate anybody, but that would be like saying to me, if you have an American Nazi on, you want to debate with him? No, I'm not doing it. So it is so beyond the pale of reason that it's just sophistry, and it's just
But what if they're a democratic socialist?
Oh, sure, okay.
Would you debate someone?
I could probably do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, you have to consider who this person is, where they're coming from, whether they're worth debating. So,
yeah, but someone who's a Catholic communist, it's just.
You think
so
that's on par with saying I'm a Catholic Nazi?
I'd have to.
Would you think
I mean, I could be nice. I'd have a hard time being charitable. I wouldn't want to sound insulting either.
You can sound insulting.
Yeah.
Well, the nice thing about debates is you get equal time to be insulting. And the other thing about debates is people really do want more light than heat. People like heat in the moment, but they're really trying to understand these issues.
Right.
So now I ask that.
But it's hard to debate somebody where you're just like, everything you believe is wrong. I mean, I could. I'm a registered Republican, and I could easily debate a Democrat, and we'd find all kinds of things to agree on.
Okay.
But a Catholic communist, it's an oxymoron. And the church has said you can't even be a Catholic socialist. I mean, the church calls your communism a satanic scourge, demonic, from the pit of hell. I don't need
So do you actually think to be a Catholic communist is like saying a Catholic Nazi? Or would you not go that far?
I'd have to. I guess I'd have to think all that through.
Yeah, fair enough. And I know that those who would hold to socialism today don't hold to everything Marx said.
Let me say, so someone doesn't clip that and get in trouble. Yeah, you can't be a Catholic and a Nazi either. Right.
No, of course. But are you saying that the two are on par? Like they're as contradictory?
No, I mean, no, they're not on par. So Nazis and communists are very different. It's one of the reasons they went after each other. Ronald Reagan used to say between a fascist and communist, there's not like a dime's worth of difference between them because they're both about the power of the state.
But actually, are they both as oxymoronic? Is what I'm asking.
Well, they are very different. So a Nazi, Nazism, fascism, and they're definitely all different, but they do all involve the power of the state.
Yeah.
and the intrusive power of the state and authoritarian control of the state.
I was shocked.
They're both really bad.
Speaking of Nazism, I was shocked to see what Marx had to say about Jews. Correct me if I've got this quote wrong, but something to the effect of, once the Jews are emancipated from the world will finally be emancipated from the Jews, or something to that effect.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And the stuff he said about blacks.
Yeah.
I mean,
not great.
Yeah, Marx and Engels, if you're reading through letters between them in German, you come across the word Nigg.
Yep.
They don't use the German word for black or Negro.
Yeah.
They use the American English racial epithet.
Yeah.
Marx uses the N word throughout his writings. He referred to one person, Ferdinand Lassalle, as the Jewish N-word. And he referred to his own son-in-law, Paul Lafargue, who was partly Cuban. So picture this, Marx and Engels, these two evolutionary atheists sitting around chortling as they try to figure out how much quote-unquote N-word blood Paul has. Paul's married to, it's his son-in-law. And they're like, I think they're talking about his cranial formation, talking about hybrid descended from the Negro race and from Egypt, 1/8 N-word blood, 1/12 N-word blood. Engels wrote a letter to Paul's wife saying that, I see he's running for office in this district in Paris that contains a zoo. Well, he'd be a perfect place for that, given that, given as a zookeeper, given that he is, as an N-word, one step closer to the animal kingdom and apes than the rest of us. They were evolutionary atheists. Right. Marx and Engels believed that black people were lower on the evolutionary scale than white people. And Marx called Paul, who was partly Cuban, Negrillo, or the gorilla. The gorilla. That's what he called his own son-in-law. Paul committed suicide in a suicide pact with Marx's daughter. Marx had two daughters who committed suicide in suicide pacts with their husbands. That's a messed up father.
Well, he might be a messed up father for the things that he said, but obviously there are good fathers whose children commit suicide as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
But you think that it was his influence that perhaps led to it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. He was. Well, there are, to be fair, there are some Marxist scholars that think that Marx was actually a doting father. So, but two of his daughters committed suicide in suicide pacts with their husbands.
Fair enough. I mean, I can see somebody kind of leveling the charge of ad hominem at you. Like, who cares? Yeah, sure, he was a horrible person. Congratulations. But I think what you're saying is actually important if we're going to be erecting statues of the man and then refusing to tear them down.
Right. If they're gonna cancel, George Washington or whoever, for what they said. I mean, you could cancel Marx, man, just for his use of the N-word alone. And by the way, I need to say this. That's the key point. But the private life of Marx is very much his writings and what he believed publicly and about the state are totally an extension of his private life in so many ways.
I see, yeah.
So in his case, the private life does offer lessons for the kind of society that he wanted. So it's relevant in his case.
So there's no duplicity in him. It's just that what's in him is shit. Is what.
There you go.
All right. Let's keep going. Abolition of all rights of inheritance.
Yeah,
all right, so communism takes over, and then no one's inheriting anything.
That's unbelievable. And for people that any millennial who considers himself or herself a Marxist or likes communism, abolition of all right of inheritance? You want what? By the way, what does that mean? That means the money you would get from your parents, one would assume that this is what that means, would be taken by the state.
Yeah.
Confiscated by the state because we've abolished your right of inheritance.
Wow. So
all that money that your parents saved, all right, that you're a trust fund, whoever, whatever you do. No, you have to be a rich kid. Just whatever. Americans, most people's parents own homes.
Yeah.
When the parents die, you're going to inherit some of their money. Why should the state get all of that money? They talk about greed. That's greed. Yeah. That's government greed. They come in, they're already taking your property and graduated progressive income tax, and then whatever you have left, the inheritance that you want to leave to your kid, they're going to take all of that. And imagine a system in which you had no right of inheritance, where all of that money went to Uncle Sam or the federal state. What's the state going to do with all that money? Build pyramids? Why do they even need that much money?
To build giant concrete brutalist architecture.
What are they even going to do with all of that? Yeah. And of course, the grandest hypocrisy of all is that Marx and Engels, the guys writing this book, got all of their money from inheritance. And these guys want to abolish it. No, they want to abolish it for you, not for them.
I heard Ben Shapiro once say, for those who want the state to be more involved in your lives, have you been to the DMV? Do you enjoy going to the post office?
Yeah. Well, another lesson here, too, is that all of these Marxist dictators that end up taking power, they're the greediest people in the world. They never give up power. Look at the Kims in North Korea. They live like kings while the entire rest of the country is broke. Look at Fidel Castro. When he died, Castro was worth $2 billion. He was one of the top 10 wealthiest rulers in the world, according to Forbes magazine, every single year. You want equal distribution of wealth? Go to a place like Cuba and North Korea. 90% of the people are equally poor. And then there's the 10% of party apparatchiks who own all the property, have all the money. And at the very top of the pyramid there's Fidel and Raul, right? And it's like that with Stalin. It's like that with Mao. It's like that with all of these communist dictators. So the big dirty secret here is really, this is communism for you, not for them. It's for the ruled, not the rulers.
Number 4, confiscation of the property.
Before we move on from that, there's a big... what would I say? Like meme kind of going around right now based around an article that was like focusing on the idea of nepotism babies. So it's like people who are kids of rich or famous parents and how they essentially putting forward a bunch of celebrities and saying, well, these people actually had rich or famous parents. And I guess the idea is that you would lose some respect for them, or that some of them would be talented and the other ones kind of just are positioned in that place unjustly because they have had this advantage. How do you think that connects to this conversation?
Well, I would add there that their parents made that money and they've earned it legally. And
their children have a right to be useless.
Right. Yeah. And
people can be useless with or without money.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate the parents shouldn't do that, but should the state then come in and play the role of
this keeps coming back to this, like, what's your solution? That's the thing it keeps coming back to, isn't it?
So we would need some sort of a morality bureau to come in Washington and decide which of these cases are just and which are unjust, and then how much of that money, presumably,
maybe Google
would need to be taken.
Right. They deserve to be
from these kids,
the son of a rich parent,
and then given to who? Right. So what's the solution to that?
That's the question you got to keep coming back to. Because it's very easy to point out awful things in the world.
Right.
But if your solution is abolish private property and have the government take care of everything.
Yeah. I mean, they're brats and that sucks, but what do you do?
And again, people with no money can be awful too, it turns out. Yeah.
And by the way, I don't envy them. I don't wake up in the middle of the night and I can't believe I can't go back to sleep. Right? Where's my manifesto?
Make that a really quick clip. Oh, I see. Centralization of credit in the hands... Oh, hang on. Confiscation of property of OM... Okay, let's try to do the next really quick.
Yeah.
Because this is going to take us 8 more hours if we don't.
Number
4.
5.
Okay.
Go to
Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of national bank with state capital and the exclusive monopoly. And an exclusive monopoly.
Right.
What does that mean?
A national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly.
That's what that means.
On all credit. Do the young people that are out there that are looking for loans for their car or their house or whatever want a banking system like that? Of course you don't.
Try getting a license plate renewed.
Yeah.
You needed to do that for.
Why do you want that? No one wants that.
All right.
So it's really a pretty good book if you just read it. No, it's not. Read it. You don't know what you're talking about.
Number 6, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state.
That's a great one.
Greyhound buses are terrific.
Yeah, right. So
that's not run by the state, is it?
Centralization of communication and transport.
Yeah, what is that actually?
In the hands of communication in those days would have been newspapers. So like
newspapers, and then phone companies would all be owned by the state.
Today it'd be phone companies, newspapers,
email.
Google, Twitter, email, radio, TV, everything. You could maybe try to do this in 1848. Today, And transport, what was transport in 1848? Did they even have railroads yet? The Transcontinental was built, what, like 1860 something. So I guess there was some rail at that time. Now there's cars and buses and planes and ship. You can't do this today. Do you want this today? Insane.
Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan.
Yeah, a common plan.
What does that mean?
For improvement.
It's a complicated
it is.
point. What does help us understand?
I don't even really know how to unpack all
Number
of that.
Number 8.
Actually, could you? Because I'm watching the clock. You got to hit number 9 because this one is stunning. And people, please listen carefully.
Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more, what's that word?
Equitable distribution.
It doesn't say equitable, though, does it?
It does.
Oh, here, I get a spelling error here, sorry. Equitable distribution of the population of the country.
So think about what this means. The gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country? Think about it, right? The gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country. What do you mean by that? How are you going to abolish the distinction between a town and a country? Well, by a more equitable distribution of the population over the country. They didn't want to just redistribute your property. They wanted to redistribute you. So the beginning of the movie, The Killing Fields, when they're emptying all those people out of the capital of Cambodia and sending them out into the countryside, and people saying, well, I'll tell you that's not in my Communist Manifesto. That's dictatorship. I can't believe they're doing something. Marx would have never supported anything. They are. They're moving everybody more equitably out into the countryside. They're gradually abolishing the distinction between town and country. All the liberals who live in New York and San Francisco. Okay,
Missouri for you.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to put you out with
no offense to Missouri. I'd much rather live there.
Yeah, we're going to put you out with the Trump MAGA hayseeds out in the Hicks. Okay, you're going to be you're going to live out there because we need a more equitable distribution of the population across the country. If that's not totalitarian or authoritarian, I don't know what is.
What's the point of that?
And you're going to have to do what the Bolsheviks did. Put them on boxcars and send them off,
or state-owned airplanes. Why would they want that?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Well, you should know. I mean, this is your thing.
All right. You want my real?
I mean, there's got to be a reason they made this as one of their top 10.
I think that the answer to this, and the fact that it could have ever gotten any supporters and still have people today, I think it's mainly ignorance and people who lack common sense. But there's no logical or rational reason for it. I think it's only a supernatural reason. It does not make logical, rational sense that these ideas could have ever had any appeal and still could, and that they could be implemented. And the fact that they were implemented by people that killed over 100 million people with these ideas, I think says it all.
Wouldn't it be possible?
I agree with my church. I think that this is satanic.
Okay, but I'm trying to get inside their head and figure out why you might want to distribute the population across the country. Wouldn't it be to take advantage of the resources of that country? So you're not just in isolated pockets with a minimal amount of resources, or at least a limited amount? Wouldn't, if you spread the population throughout the country, presumably you could become more wealthy?
Well, you don't want to become wealthy.
Yes.
Right?
No, yeah.
You're destroying community, but they would say that they don't.
I'm with you. If the goal is to destroy all traditional, they can't hear you. So I'm saying,
yeah, that's good.
Okay, you say that again. Can you repeat that? You reiterate that.
So she said you can't just dismantle the community or the family. You got to dismantle the community. It's like Marx. Yeah. Everything that exists deserves to perish. Yeah. He's standing in the middle of the burning field, the burning city, right? Everything in flames, and saying, now we can begin anew. It's like you got to take everything down. They call it the most radical rupture in traditional relations.
Okay. Final one, and then we can be done with these 10 points, and we can all take a drink of whiskey. Free education. Well, we've done that. Free education for all children in public schools.
Yeah, it actually says that. people are shocked when they see that. But it actually says free education for all children in public schools. So they wanted, and the Bolsheviks immediately did this. They stopped home education. They stopped religious education. They took all schools away from the Russian Orthodox Church. They did this in Cuba. They did this in all the different countries where communism was taken hold. North Korea, Pyongyang was once called the Jerusalem of the East. It was a very religious city. They take everybody and they put them in public schools, collective schools, no teaching of God, no teaching of religion, and to do the full indoctrination. And by the way, what does it say at the beginning of the 10 points from Marx and Engels? So people are thinking, don't they realize that this would require despotism? Actually, yeah. Of
100%.
course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads.
Yes.
There's a Marx biographer who says, it is absurd to blame Marx for the gulags and the despotism. What are you talking about? Marx said that you can't even do this unless you have despotic inroads. Marx knew this would require despotism. I mean, you got to live in a complete fantasy land to think that you could take away people's private property, inheritance, and all this other stuff without despotism. Of course it requires despotism.
Do you think today then, having looked at these 10 things, that the common, I don't know why we keep picking on university students, but the common university student who would say he's a socialist looks out at an unfair world and would like to see it more fair?
I think that typical student who, let's say, might say positive things about communism in a poll doesn't know any of this.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
In fact, I spoke at a...
But the heavy progressive or gradual income tax is really one of the only things
that they would support.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, I think that's right. In fact, the Democratic Party supports that. I mean, they had the upper rate of 70%, although the Democrats in August 13th, 1981, and also 1986 supported both the Reagan tax cuts, Joe Biden included. So the Senate Democrats all voted for the Democratic House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed Reagan's 1981 tax cut, and Bill Clinton brought up to 39.6. There are people like Bernie and others who would take it up a lot higher. In fact, I always say, ask somebody like AOC or Ilhan Omar or Jerry Nadler, one of these people, in your perfect world, what would be the upper income tax rate? I think that's a great question to ask people because it forces them to give a practical answer on a specific point.
Yeah, the other thing too is this distinction between like equity and equality. So if we take 100 people and put them in a village because we're spreading them throughout the country, and we give them all $100,000, you give them all equal resources.
Right.
The idea that everyone's going to live an equally decent life is insane. Some people are going to be sick. Some people are going to be vicious. Some people are going to be more industrious. Yeah,
and if you have an actual free market economy, some people are going to grow that 100,000 and end up having a lot more than everybody else because everybody's not made the same with the same talents. Right, with the same ambition. Ronald Reagan used to say that he believed that the best thing that a free market society could do and that America could do is give everybody the equal opportunity. Everybody has a chance to start at the starting line. Right. No one's prohibited from starting at the starting line. But after that, where you go depends on your own initiative and everything else. And I'm not saying in a callous way, well, and as for those who don't do well and are out in the street, yeah, fine, right? Let them, what did Scrooge say? Let them decrease the surplus population or whatever. I'm saying help those people. That's where the church comes in. And frankly, too, that's where the state can help. That's a legitimate role for the state.
Okay. All right, let's take a break, and then we come back. We are going to put you on the hot seat with all of these questions from our local supporters. So if you're watching right now, mattfradd.locals.com, feel free to put in a question under the questions on communism post that we put up recently, and we'll get back to that soon. Hey, if you want to pray better, and you're not great at praying right now, you might need the fantastic #1 downloaded Catholic app in existence, Hallow. Hallow.com/Matt. Go check them out over there. Click the link in the description below, because if you sign up over there, you'll actually get Hallow for 3 months free. You'll have access to their entire app, their sleep stories, their novenas, their daily gospels, their everything.
Matt, on an unrelated note, I was trying to find somewhere that I could, hear Jonathan Rumi read the Sermon on the Mount or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
Do you
Jonathan
know anywhere
Rumi,
that I could do that?
Hallow.com/Matt. Yep. Jason Everett can read a night story to you. Bobby Angel does stuff.
Father Mike Schmitz.
Yeah, Father Mike Schmitz. It really is a fantastic app.
Here's the thing though, Matt. I don't want to put all this money into it if I don't know if it's great.
Exactly.
If it's the perfect thing.
You're very good at throwing up softballs. So if you download the app right now, I think you can use a couple of features, but not many. So you can pay for it, and it's a reasonable price a month. But if you go to hallow.com/Matt, again, click the link in the description below. That does two things. Number one, it lets them know that I sent you, making them like me more, and I like being liked by them. Second, and more importantly for you, you'll get a 3-month free trial. So you can try it for, 90 days? And you can decide whether or not you like it. And if you don't, cancel by the end of that 3-month free trial, and you won't pay a cent. But I use it, my wife uses it, it's really great.
I think a really great use case for it too, just something that I was impressed that it had was morning prayer.
Yeah.
I think that's really good because it's hard to read through the book, find the right pieces and things. So I think that's a good way to
helpful.
pray more is to try
for cheesy. Next thing I want to talk about is Exodus 90. Exodus 90 is an ascetical program for men where you and a bunch of fellas get together in a confraternity, as it were, in a small group, and for 90 days really live the spiritual life like a champion. I mean, you're praying for an hour every day, you're not eating in between meals, you're not drinking alcohol, you're only taking cold showers. It's a very grueling 90 days, but it's certainly worth it. They did independent research on people who completed Exodus 90, and what they found is that most people were using their phones and computers far less than when they started. They had better marriages, they had better prayer lives. It's really terrific, and they're starting soon in January, so now's the time to begin thinking about it. So go to exodus90.com/Matt, and they've also got a fantastic app, and you can learn more about it over there, exodus90.com/Matt. Finally, I want to let you guys know about Parler and the fact that I'm over there. Go to Matt Fradd if you want. The link is in the description below. I'm always posting the latest videos that we put up over there, and that's a great way to stay in touch with all the work of Pints with Aquinas. It's non-censorial. They're not going to shadow ban you or any stuff like that. So parler.com/Matt Fradd. Thanks so much.
Okay, we're back.
And we're back. Have you done a long interview like this before?
Not this long, and no, and we were just talking to Jenny, one of the people here, and I don't want to put this in misrepresent her words, but at least got me to thinking this, and maybe this is her view as well. But I think most people who think that their communism is good, who haven't really read it, are just ignorant and don't know. But this does have an appeal to certain very selfish and evil people who, like Lenin and Stalin, who can see in this a way to control people and resources and make themselves super powerful. And now please understand me. I'm not saying for somebody out there who's a Marxist today, kind of intellectual, I'm not saying that you're evil, but I'm just saying this has an appeal to certain people like that, because they look at this and say, wow, if I really want to control things, if I really want to control property, this is for me. Right?
One thing I think that's bothering me a little bit in this interview, right, is that I've thrown out the term capitalism, and you've sort of said, well, you're not a capitalist, and you know people on Wall Street who aren't really capitalists, and so you're unwilling to sort of identify with that title. Fair enough, and that's okay. I mean, you can define yourself however you want to, and yet whenever we're talking about socialists in any sense, it sounds like we want to throw the manifesto at them and say, well, this must be what you believe.
Yeah, no, I don't want to do that. In fact, like I said, a lot of modern socialists are kind of busily redefining socialism in a way that they feel better defines what they believe. And
surely you'd be in favor of that.
Well, I don't like messing with definitions to the point where you can no longer define things. That's a big problem. I would tell that person, in fact, I say this all the time to people, no, what you really support is social democracy. right? More like what they have in maybe Belgium or France. And I will kind of plead with them. I'll say, you're not a democratic socialist. You're more like a social democrat. And they'll say, what's the difference? And I say, well, let me try to explain. So I teach political science, right? And so these words have meaning. And so if people start going on Google and these faceless 20-something millennials who are like redefining words like cultural Marxism as anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, and a lot of them don't know what they're talking about. So you can't tinker with definitions, and then the definitions no longer have any meaning. You can't soften them up and whitewash them and dress them up and put a pretty pink bow on them and make them into something that they're not.
Okay, fair enough. So, but then your problem with the term capitalism is it sounds like that what you're saying is the reason you're unwilling to accept that title is that it was maybe Karl Marx.
How do they define it? If you type in, if you go to Google right now and type in capitalist definition.
I'll do just that. It does look like, well, I don't know who came up with the term. But
right, that's the problem. We don't.
I see.
Yeah.
So, all right, fair enough. Capitalism, an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit.
Well, see, I really don't know of any country that really fits that. I mean,
oh, really?
I don't. Yeah, what would that even be? I mean, if you look at the Heritage Foundation's great index of economic freedom, the freest country in the world is Hong Kong, economically. Mm-hmm. Singapore is second. New Zealand, I think, is third. Australia is top 10. America is now out of the top 20. So I don't know if that really defines anybody today. Yeah.
All right. Look, we don't have much time, and so we've got a lot of questions from our local supporters. So would it be okay if we tried to think of this as the lightning round?
Yeah,
get through it as
it.
quickly as we can.
Yeah,
Jeff says, I listened to most of your book, The Devil and Karl Marx. We'll put a link in the description below if people want to get it. He says, I had to stop listening. I really enjoy history and know a lot of bad things to do with communism and Russia. I struggled with your book with all the dark things they did to priests and nuns. I'm glad you wrote the book. Did you struggle researching for that book?
Well, Jeff, is that his name? Jeff, if you pick it back up and read the afterword, and you could see how I express my agony about having to research this, and it's dark and depressing. It really is, and I can tell you quite literally at the end of the day, after writing this stuff, I had to get away from it and read a book about baseball or football, right? Or and actually, what I usually do at night is I read books, biographies of saints. I'm reading Padre Pio right now, so I need a break from it because it's so dark. And I mean, for people who don't know what he's talking about, imagine opening a book with this. This is Karl Marx's poem, "The Pale Maiden," 1837. Thus heaven I've forfeited, I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell. Or this one, The Player, 1841, by Marx. Look now, my blood-dark sword shall stab unerringly within thy soul. The hellish vapors rise and fill the brain, till I go mad and my heart is utterly changed. See the sword? The prince of darkness sold it to me. For he beats the time and gives the signs. Ever more boldly I play the dance of death. Karl Marx. So his favorite line was Mephistopheles, everything that exists deserves to perish. And if you read this section of the book on infiltration of churches, and he's probably talking about the prison of Pitești in Romania. Oh, man. Where they took priests, tied them to crosses, the communists did, laid them on the floor, had prisoners come by, urinate on them, defecate on them, make the priest consecrate the Eucharist in the form of feces, shove it in mouths. Unbelievable stuff. Richard Wurmbrand from Romania saying that while the communists were torturing him, is saying something like, one of his torturers said, I've lived all of my life for this moment to express all my evil in my heart against you. And one of them chanting, I am the devil, as he's whipping him. I mean, it's awful. Yeah. Called Mary the whore of Christ, and Christ the great idiot crucified, on and on and on. Richard Wurmbrand, the pastor, said there is nothing, even the worst descriptions of Dante's Inferno cannot compare to the hellaciousness of the way you're treated in communist prison camps. I could truly say that this was of the devil.
This is what the Tower of Babel gets you. doesn't get you to heaven. Yeah, we can try to build toward a utopia. Speaking of utopia, have you read St. Thomas More's book on utopia?
I have, and so it's very different, 1516, and sometimes it's often cited as one of the earlier examples of communism. But in Thomas More's book, religion, for example, is not a bad thing. In fact, priests are part of a highly respected, revered class. So in a way, you can't call that in any way a communist. And look at Thomas More. Thomas More was a great son of the church who went to his death defending the Christian faith, the Catholic Church. So in no way is Thomas More's utopia in any way like Karl Marx or the communist Marxist and Leninist vision.
Kyle Whittington says, "What are your thoughts on distributism?"
Yeah, it's Chesterton was a big advocate of it, Belloc. I could see. I think they were drawn to it given where they were at the times in Britain. The Fabian Society was rising up at that time. The Fabian Society believed in evolution rather than revolution. By the way, the coat of arms for the Fabian Society is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Look it up. You imagine that? H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw, all those guys. So I think they were maybe looking for something in England at the time. The Labour Party's manifesto of 1918 called for common ownership of the means of production. But I think distributism, I don't like it, and I think certainly today it wouldn't. I can't imagine it being implemented in America today.
H.G. Wells's Time Traveler seems to be inspired by a hatred of what might be thought of as capitalism. Yeah.
And Wells was... Wells also made some awful comments.
He's a very anti-Catholic fella.
Comments about Lenin and Stalin, which were horrible, horribly positive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. George Bernard Shaw, same thing, really embarrassing. I wrote a book on that called Dupes. I lay all that out in my book, Dupes.
Okay. Michael Vielma says, what are your thoughts on investing in the stock markets or 401ks? There are certain Catholics that say you shouldn't be participating in that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a free market system where you can invest your money. I mean, it's a risk like everything else. But
what if these...
but you're free to and you're free not to. So it's a free exchange of ideas, free commerce, freedom, private property.
I mean, how interested should we be in what these things are contributing to financially?
Yeah. Well, that's a concern too. I mean, and you consider all those different things when you invest your money.
Can Dr. Kengor speak to Marxist obsession with destroying sexual ethics and their influence on the sexual revolution?
Oh, yeah, I could go on and on about that. But that's, I mean, one of the crowning statements on that was Kate Millett's 1968 book, Sexual Politics, which was her dissertation at Columbia University. She was a Frankfurt School cultural sexual Marxist. She was, and I've even talked about the Frankfurt School, but that's Herbert Marcuse, Wilhelm Reich, who was one of the kind of predecessors to the Frankfurt School in Germany, who was a Freudian Marxist. So imagine you got to be really, the worst philosopher of the 19th century, Marx, and the nuttiest guy of the 20th century, Freud, and thinking, we should fuse these together into a common field of Freudian Marxism. So Wilhelm Reich wrote the book and coined the term the sexual revolution. And if you read Reich's actual memoirs, it is stunning. The sexual stuff is unbelievable. He's 5 years old, fantasizing about,
doesn't matter.
Stimulating the farm animals, fantasizing about jumping in bed with his mother and his mother's lover, and on. Wilhelm Reich was a sexual freak.
Yeah.
And that guy wrote the book, The Sexual Revolution. And see, people will criticize me. Oh, you're, like you said, someone might say, you're attacking Marx's personal life in order to denigrate his ideas. In so many of these cases, and Reich is a great example, the personal life explains the ideas. And you've got to go into the personal life to really get a feel for where they're coming from.
Yeah, that makes sense. Daniel James has a good question. What's interesting about Daniel is that he was arrested for Antifa activities and then had a conversion to Christ. And
wow.
He said he started listening to Pints with Aquinas and started to learn how to pray the rosary. Anyway, so Daniel says, Dr. Kengor, with the recent passing of the beloved Queen Elizabeth II, what are your thoughts on monarchy as a political system? I've heard that some Catholics prefer monarchy as a form of government.
I was going to say, with the recent passing of Franco Harris, to bring us back to the beginning of our conversation on the Immaculate Reception.
Right. Nope.
It'd be a great place to close.
Sure, we could do that, I guess.
No, I mean, you know,
your thoughts on monarchy?
No, I'm not a monarchist. I mean, I think that the system that the American founders created as originally envisioned, and if you stick to it, is about the best system that's been created. Winston Churchill famously said, democracy is not perfect, but it's better than all the other systems. I would say that about free market systems as well, too. I'm not saying that free markets are the solution to everything. It's not going to bring you to utopia. It's not a panacea, but it's certainly better than closed economies and closed markets and non-democracies.
Any super chats or questions in there worth bringing up? We have a ton here, but...
There were some of them have already been addressed. Let's see.
Let me ask this while you're looking for one. This comes from T-Bone, or T-Boone. Could you please ask Dr. Kengor...
T-Boone Pickens. Yeah, speaking of capitalists. Yeah.
Could you please ask Dr. Kengor to shed light on the commonly held belief that the Scandinavian countries are a socialist paradise we should model ourselves after?
That's a great question. And do some Googling on this. There are a bunch of really good articles on how the Scandinavian countries, they're not socialist. In fact, if you look in the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom, go to the Scandinavian countries. Some of them are ranked more free economically than the United States. There's a really good PragerU video as well that one of my students sent me not that long ago from somebody in one of the Scandinavian countries. Just because a country might have government-managed healthcare or maybe generous pensions or high regulation, it doesn't make them socialist. And this is what Bernie and AOC, Bernie Sanders is horrible about this. He'll tell people all the time, well, look at the Netherlands. It's not a socialist country. Venezuela is a socialist country. That's socialism. Just because, again, those countries are more social democracies. And the state does some things, it does other things, but some of them have lower tax rates than we do. So it's much more complicated than that.
Patrick Turner says, many people use Jesus feeding the people with the fish and bread as an example of socialism. How can this be easily refuted? Was Jesus a socialist?
Jesus was not a socialist. For one thing, Jesus wasn't against religion. He didn't call it the opiate of the masses. And in fact, if you want to start working through the parables of Jesus, right, look at some of them, the tenants, right, the vineyard owner who also pays his people what he wants, depending on whether they came earlier in the day or later in the day. And by the way, defends the ownership rights of the vineyard owner, right? He's allowed to have a vineyard. I mean, Jesus is not against private property. No, Jesus is not Karl Marx.
And then somebody responded under this person's question, said, socialists can't multiply the fish and bread miraculously.
Right, that's exactly right. That's right. Yeah, Ronald Reagan said, socialism works only in heaven where they don't need it and in hell where they already have it.
We've addressed this, but Gina asked, why are so many Christians under the impression that communism has any similarities to Christianity? Where are the common errors in that line of thinking, and how do we refute them? Yeah,
they'll have this incredibly simplistic approach of looking at certain things in Scripture, the New Testament, that talk about sharing or sharing wealth, and say, "Hey, Marx does that too." Well, so what? That's I mean, Hitler loved puppies, right? Hitler was a vegetarian, right? You don't take a couple things here and a couple things there and say, so thus this must be a good ideology. No, that is sophistry. It's incredibly simplistic, and let me just say, extraordinarily intellectually lazy.
Yeah. Is feminism rooted in Marxism, communism? Asks Heath Faraci.
No, I don't think so. No, there have been a number of prominent feminist Marxists. In fact, the most famous is Angela Davis, who was a student of Herbert Marcuse, the guru of the 1960s New Left and one of the most prominent members of the Frankfurt School. And look her up. She wrote the foreword to the Patrisse Cullors, the founder of BLM's memoirs. And Patrisse Cullors said of herself and Alicia Garza, two of the founders of BLM, she said, "We are trained Marxists. We are very steeped in Marxism and Marxist ideologies."
But you don't think that feminism in any way has been influenced by communist thought?
Well,
seems to me obviously that it would.
Well, I mean, Kate Millett, who wrote Sexual Politics, which was her sister Mallory, by the way, is a very devout Catholic. Read Mallory's article about Kate Millett at frontpagemagazine.com. But Kate was a sexual Marxist and a feminist. So she was fusing the two. And also Betty Friedan was a communist.
But I just think of like the feminist talking points, right? Again, you have like the bourgeoisie, the man in this capitalist system, monogamy, and then you've got the oppressed, the woman who has to have abortion, has to have access to contraception in order to free herself from the shackles of her.
I mean, the commonality is they're both kind of, I think, destructive left-wing ideologies, but if you looked at sort of what are the tenets of feminism and line them up against like the 10-point plan of Marx.
I see. Fair enough. Yeah, you're using words correctly. Right. Yeah. I thought this meme.
I insist on these categories.
I thought this meme was hilarious. It's a red book and it says, "Well, that didn't work." Yeah, an abbreviated history of communism.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, except that's almost too cavalier. It didn't not just work. It was very destructive and killed a lot of people, wrecked a lot of lives.
Way to ruin a funny meme, dude. I lived through communism, says Ania, and my parents were active in underground. It is scary to see how it cripples back in the U.S. with so many people clapping.
Amen. I've had parents email me, and I've done talk shows on the subject of communism where I'll get a call from a distraught mom who's crying and saying, I came to this country after the Berlin Wall fell to escape communism, and I sent my daughter to this prominent elite college, and she is a communist. She is a communist. How can this happen in America? Yeah.
Final question. Rootberg says, could you name one place in the Bible that promises that a free market will in general lead to human flourishing, and has the magisterium taught that human interactions within a free market economy will somehow tend towards prosperity? Are you identifying the invisible hand with the hand of God?
No.
That is, where does this great trust of his come from? What is his theological basis for your belief in free markets?
Well, I would say read Rerum Novarum, read Quadragesimo Anno, Centesimus Annus, those encyclicals that very much describes my. I actually very much am in sync with the church on these things. But for example, the Bible defends private property. It says, "Thou shalt not steal." This book says, and it's a good way to wrap up, that the entire communist theory or program may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property.
Theft.
Yeah, that's right. That is state fiat to abolish and take away your private property. The Bible doesn't support that. I mean, now the Bible encourages you to do charitable, good things with your wealth, and even share it with the needy. But it's not a manifesto on free markets. But it certainly ain't this.
As we wrap up, how do we want to wrap up? Is there a single book that you're most proud of, that you would point people to get a fuller understanding of communism and how to refute it?
Well, I mentioned Communism, A History by Richard Pipes. That's a really good one. You mean in my own books?
Well, I guess any good. I like what you said about that book, that's not too long. You don't have to invest your whole life into understanding what you would consider to be, and I would consider to be, such an idiot.
Yeah, and I did a book called The Devil and Karl Marx. I did Politically Incorrect Guide to Communism. And I did a book called A Pope and a President on Ronald Reagan and John Paul II and the end of the Cold War, which talks about Fatima and a whole bunch of other things. And I sent to you too, maybe Neil could post them if he hasn't already, but a couple of articles. One I did
send them to you, Neil.
on Marx, on Christianity, Judaism, and evolution, race. And that kind of sums up some of his really outrageous beliefs on religion, Judaism, and race. And I also did a piece for the American Spectator called Why Not Cancel Karl Marx? And for the record, I don't support canceling anyone. But when you look at what this guy has said and done, you wonder why people on the left haven't canceled this guy. And the reason is because he's one of their guys. He's on the left, but Marx's background is really outrageous.
And you have a recent book you just put out?
Yeah, The Devil and Bella Dodd.
Tell us about that.
Which came out through 10 books. So Bella Dodd was a master organizer for the Communist Party in the 1930s and 1940s in New York, put 1,000 to 1,500 teachers in the New York State Teachers Union, and then, according to what she told Alice von Hildebrand and others, and we spent a lot of time on this, helped place, quote, over 1,000 communist men, unquote, in Catholic seminaries. And we go through that claim, the documentation for it, is it possible, everything else, very, very, very carefully, and very, hopefully, a very thoughtful.
So the claim that the Catholic Church was infiltrated by the communists isn't just some cockeyed
no, that's right. No,
theorist.
she was part of it, and then she left the party in 1948. The party accused her in a press release of being anti-Negro, anti-Semitic, anti-Puerto Rican, pro-fascist, pro-Nazi, the same thing they always do. It's page 1 of their playbook, right? They've been doing this for 100 years. And she was eventually brought back into the Catholic faith by Bishop Fulton Sheen in a wonderful conversion story. So in her case, the devil and Karl Marx remained infatuated with the devil throughout his life and remained an atheist.
Sounds like this new book's a little more hopeful.
Yeah, in her case, she described breaking away from communism as breaking away from the seduction of the devil, and led a life of redemption and reparation, and spent the rest of her life as a courageous witness, warning the world and the church not to embrace communism, but to reject it.
I would think, too, as our people watching this, they probably have many loved ones who are interested in socialism or may spout some certain lines like that. A simple kind of Socratic method of questioning could be helpful. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Have you read the book?
Right.
What was the single thing that Marx or Engels said that you found most compelling? Why?
Well, and I would say when they're in classes with a professor who's maybe not giving them enough information, or even if the professor does give information and says something like abolition of private property, just put your hand up and in a non-confrontational way say, what do they mean by that, Professor? What would that look like? And
how would this excellent idea be implemented?
Yeah, right. How would this be carried out? And without, not in a mean way, right? Just say, but Professor, I don't know, you support this? What would that look like? How much of it would just start taking the lid off, start asking questions, and let it fall apart through its own obvious self-contradictions and inherent fallacies.
Well, Dr. Kengor, this has been fantastic. I've learned a lot, and it's been great to spend some time with you.
Wait till you find out I made it all up.
He's actually a communist.
Oh, we do have one
infiltrated Pints with Aquinas.
I wanted to just straighten this a little bit. The communist cross, the Pope actually said this is not okay, and shook his head.
I know. And by the way,
you said the opposite.
Well, no. What's unfortunate about the picture at America Magazine is Francis is smiling.
That was your point. Not that he didn't.
Yeah, and Francis has said the Marxist ideology is wrong. So he has not been good on communism. He's not a Marxist. He's not pro-communist. He's not very anti-communist. He's been bad on China. He's been bad on Nicaragua.
What's funny is there's also a photo of him looking pretty pissed off about it.
I know.
Look.
But not a... Yeah, that's right. Which one is that? But that's not the one at America,
that's
right?
How many people
do you see the one at America?
I haven't seen the
one at America.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
so it was the one time, but he looked happy in that one.
I know. I think he's... confirm it before we leave so I can apologize if I'm wrong, but I think he's smiling.
I'm going to find it. I've got it. I'm opening it. He's smiling. Yep.
Right. I know. Right.
Shame on them.
And it could be, that could have been a moment where he's smiling like puzzled, like, what the,
It does look a little goofy when you look at it, that someone would think it's okay to make that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's absurd. A
communist crucifix, right? By the stripes of Marx, we are healed.
It looks about as goofy as that. We won't comment on what that is, but
yeah.
Glory to Jesus Christ. Thank you for being with us.
Hey, thanks so much. Loved it. Yeah.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, you got it.